so we're bigger.
Well, I wanted to keep the control room up. But...
Okay. Okay. I hate this delay part.
Welcome, everyone, to From the Ground Up podcast. And as always, we would love it if you guys would check out PortCityPythons.com. So PortCityPythons.com, there are shirts available as well as some animals available. And what else do we have on the website? We also have cocoa core bricks that you can buy, a substrate. And then we also have different blocks of cocoa products. If you guys are interested, just hit me up and I can kind of tell you all about it. Certified organic coconut chips and peat. And then there's also Amazon links below in the description of the YouTube video as well as the podcast, which all you do is click on those and then go shop as you normally would on Amazon. And then that gets kicked back and helps us out with the podcast. And is there anything else you want to get out there?
Just again about oaks.
Okay, yeah, we are vending oaks in 2 weeks. So is that the 10th or the 9th? 10th? So it's going to be Saturday, November 10th. And come check us out. We're going to have corn snakes. We're going to have cocoa products, short for coconut, by the way.
And maybe some springtails.
Oh, yeah, we were trying to get springtails and different plants. We may have some, but I don't know. We kind of, I semi-failed in my attempts of all those things. So we'll probably, once we do a solo podcast, we'll talk all about basically
your failures.
Me failing at doing all the naturalistic vivarium stuff that I wanted to get done, but I didn't really. I don't know. Just a noob at it, really. I don't know what I'm doing. I can keep snakes and breed snakes, but that's about it.
Can't keep springtails.
I can't keep springtails, yeah. Little bastards.
Okay, so our guest today.
Long intro, huh? So our guest today is Laurence Kenchington from LARK Pythons. So Laurence keeps a bunch of Somalia, so scrub pythons, as well as he has some liasis and even some random colubrids here and there. So we'll talk all about that. So Laurence, can you give us a quick intro of who you are, where you're from, and kind of what got you started into scrub pythons?
Well, as a kid growing up in England, I was always interested in reptiles, and like whenever we went to a pet shop or a zoo, it'd always be like the reptile section I'd go to, and we'd kept, like my parents had always kept animals, like we had like tropical fish like arowana. Then I think we had a soft-shelled turtle of some kind as well. But that was way back, but my interest was always in snakes, sort of growing up watching wildlife documentaries, like as most of us did, sort of Steve Irwin, sort of Austin Stevens. So then sort of like we moved over to Ireland then from the UK when I was about 7 years old and like past school, whatever. And I was up in university in Dublin, and one of my friends just was like, hey, listen, you should go down to like this snake shop down there. She was in zoology. And she was sort of like, you should go down there and talk to these guys. I can just like have a walk around and see. So went down there, instantly sort of got talking to the guy, and she told me that she knew of a pet shop that was closing down that had a normal ball python and enclosure for sale for sort of like 80, 100 euro. So sort of I thought about it, and we sort of like, she went out there for me because she'd kept snakes before, and she sort of like, she said, you'll need to upgrade the enclosure within about 2 months, and like it's a bit like didn't look the best cared for. Like reptiles aren't that big over here. I mean, they're growing in popularity certainly, but it's not sort of, wouldn't be anywhere near the numbers that you see in the UK. So anyway, but the initial flood, the initial interest was open. Like I was like thinking about getting one. So in the end, I brought my dad, who'd always been interested in reptiles, into the shop, and sort of like thought about it, and he decided as a present, he decided to get me, like he said, like, yeah, like what sort of thing do you want to go for? And like at the time, I hadn't really looked into many of the species, and it was sort of just like going by what the people in the shop said, and got a really close bond with the shop owner over a very short period of time. So I got my first snake, which was just a pastel ball python female, and then shortly after that, like I'd go into the shop, I'd help out a bit, like if if I had some spare time over the summer or when I was in college, and fell in love with a pair of Madagascan ground boas that they had in there. And it was sort of like started researching them. Like the owner had said, they were the only pair he'd had come in, and he'd always wanted to keep them. One was meant to be promised to someone. Someone had said like, "Oh, I'll come in and buy the female," and he didn't want to sell them separately. So like he hadn't heard from the guy for a couple of months, and in the end, the guy was like, "No." So in that time, I'd bought a Jumerals boa from him as well, and then bought the Madagascans, and then from there sort of got a retic from that shop as well.
Whoa, number one customer.
Yeah, like I think it was a bit. They'd sold it, I think, and it had come back in. The guy just like didn't want to work with it or couldn't work with it, so it was a fairly sort of small animal that it was drop feeding in the shop. But like it was a good, healthy specimen, so decided to get that one, and then shortly afterwards got my first green tree after about 6 months, and then was watching some Austin Stevens and saw his episode on the Australian scrub pythons, and something just clicked, and I was just like, right, I want to get those. So like researched into it, found out you can't get the Aussie stuff, unfortunately, but found a couple of guys who were working with the Papuan scrubs. And then from there, it was just sort of like every chance I saw, I was like, right, yeah, I want to build up a scrub collection, and started researching who had them, who was breeding them, and came across a guy in the UK who'd produced some Barnecks, and went and got my first female. And that was sort of a small, strong Barneck female, juvenile. I think she was about 6 months old at the time. And from there, I was just hooked. I loved everything about the scrubs. Like they captured my attention like no other snake I'd worked with in the shop, like be it bloods or carpets. There was just something about them. So that was sort of how I got started into it. And then my dad sort of decided like he wanted to keep as well, and I sort of bought him. I was working a part-time job, bought him his first snake, which was Anery boa that the one of the guys in the shop happened to get in, and he was just sort of said, thinking of letting him go, and so I sort of said, yeah, okay, I'll take him. And that was
Let him go to me.
That was a Father's Day present to my dad. Was a 6-7 foot male boa. And then we just sort of started going into it sort of like together. Like he'd always been interested, he'd always wanted to keep them, and it was just sort of like it was something we could share going into it. So we sort of like built up the collection between us. Like it's sort of a bit of, oh, it's like, oh, this really nice scrub's come up. Can I need to loan us some money. Like I need to like borrow half of the cost of it, and then I'll pay you back, sort of thing. So it's sort of definitely working together, and sort of like we both work with the animals, and he's confident working with the scrubs. So like if I'm away working, I know that the collection's in good hands. He's still keeping up the work anyway, so I'm very lucky to have that, or to have that opportunity to me, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to be doing what I'm doing.
Now, did you know the full extent of, say, like the reputation of scrubs or the keeping that's involved? You know,
Don't know if you guys can still hear me, but the video's dropped on my end.
did like a good job of reconnecting us. Are you there?
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, it's just come back.
Yeah,
Our
we just lost
internet.
internet for some reason.
Very
Which
strange.
Oh, that's okay. I'm used to it living in Ireland. It's fine. I thought it was me. That had dropped the internet.
No, it was us. That's so weird. Okay, sorry. So you were answering about like, had you known the reputation?
I'd spoken to the guy in the shop, because I got to work like closely with him, and he was sort of a mentor in many ways, who is sort of like he shared his experience, let me like work with the snakes in the shop.
So this isn't, your normal pet shop where there's like a 10-year-old
this
kid.
It is a reptile specialist. Like they do specialize in reptiles. So it is definitely like a specialist shop.
Something really crazy is going on.
This is weird.
I don't know what's happening, but
okay,
sorry.
and we're back
For the third time. So it was a pretty they knew their stuff in this reptile store.
Yeah, like the guy's been keeping for sort of 20, 30 years, I think, at this point. Like he started when he was 12, and he's kept a whole load of species. Like he's gone from like the American water snakes, he's kept sort of like berms, retics. He's never really kept scrubs, but he's kept sort of Sanzinia, he's bred Sanzinia, and a whole load of other species. So like they really, really know their stuff, and he's a really nice guy. And like he'll take, if you want to, he'll spend hours talking to you in the shop. Like there'll be other customers there, and he'll talk to you just for hours, like letting you know all of his experiences. So that's what sort of really helped me sort of like grow on quickly as a keeper, like initially. And I asked him about scrubs, and he sort of said, well, they're going to challenge you. They're going to be a surprise. But he said, look, you've had the Madagascans, you've had which aren't too bad, but like you've had the retic. He said, if you think you're ready for it, then he said you should go for it. And I was looking for something as a bit of a challenge, because the retic came in, he was a little bit jumpy, a little bit bitey, like not sort of even food aggressive in the enclosure, just wanted to be left alone. And I worked with him slowly and sort of like got him calm reasonably quickly. And so I sort of wanted something that had a bit more of a challenge to it. So I decided, like, yeah, scrubs are where I want to go. And I'd researched them. I'd spoken to people who had owned them before, and they were like, yeah, it's going to be a steep learning curve, but starting off with juvenile animals is a lot easier than sort of diving in headfirst into adults. I think it was about 4 months after I got my first scrub, I got my first sub-adult, which was a southern at about 8 foot. And then a couple of months after that, I had the 4 adult oxybills as well as Mahogany, the Sarong Barneck. So I'd sort of, one guy in England I gotten to know, I bought the one animal off him, got to know him. He sort of said, well, like, I want these animals to go to the places where I think they're going to stand the best chance of breeding. So he worked out like payment schemes and that, and I got 4 Timor Pythons off him as well.
Whoa.
So that was the founding collection of the most of his animals sort of like make up the founding animals of the collection we have now, between like 2 or 3 people who had really stunning collections. And I just managed to get to know them at the right time and sort of just like could cherry pick which ones I wanted. And I missed a couple, like back then when I was buying the oxybills, there was a xanthic, a silver Moluccan python that the guy had as well, and I got to work with this animal, and it was really, really stunning. And at the time, I didn't know how unusual the xanthic Moluccans were, and I sort of decided, no, I'm going to go for the oxybills as well, which he said were rare, and he didn't really say much about the Clastolepis, but
have you seen the xanthic Timor that was at Tinley this year?
Yeah, it's Chad's, isn't it? Chad Gray, I think. Yeah, that's something interesting. Like I do like the normal Timors. I do like the yellows, and like in general, I'm not sort of like a morph kind of guy, but stuff like that where it's just like something's coming from a farm or something like that. It's like, yeah, something that should be worked on. Like it is something. I mean, like it's what we're doing with scrubs. Like we've got the axanthic Norta and the xanthic Norta, so it's just like, well, we selectively breed for that, so selectively breed for xanthic Timors, yeah.
And now you mentioned that you got, a couple captive born animals, but I know that captive born and bred animals are kind of hard to come by, and probably just as hard as it is over there. But what's kind of the difference between those captive animals? Like, have they been easier to work with from the farm raised or the long-term captive animals?
I wouldn't say particularly that like the captive bred ones are easier to work with. Like some of them are worse. Like the Barnet, which I got originally, now is her and her sibling are just completely psychotic, and they're both CB animals. Like I did tame her down when I was in college, and then as I got more animals, I preferred seeing them just in the enclosures doing what they do rather than taking them out to handle them. And with scrubs, it's sort of like any sort of extra stress that you don't really need on them, which taking them out. And also just like I prefer to look at them in the enclosure, like they're nice big displays. They're like all the like UV lighting for everything, so I'm just like I can admire the animals, and I love handling them, but sort of unless it's a necessity, I wouldn't take any sort of like, especially adult female animals, I'd never just sort of like take one of them out for no reason. It wouldn't be something that I do. But in general, the wild caught ones I've had are some of the calmer animals of the scrubs. Like I've got two new wild caught animals, and they're very similar to all the rest of them. Like there's a lot of bluff and a fight when you go into the cage. Like they're less up if you don't get them quickly. But in general, like when they're out, they're slow moving, they're inquisitive. One of the captive bred Norters I have, you take him out and he just thrashes continually. He's just thrashing around like he bit me in the thigh once. He's about 10 foot and just sort of was thrashing around and just bang went onto the thigh and let go immediately. So, and that one's captive bred. But then you got other sort of 8 foot, 9 foot wild caught ones which are just completely docile, like they're just crawling over your hand as if there's nothing there for them to worry about. So it is, and I don't particularly like using hooks to really get the scrubs out of the enclosure. I'll use the hook to sort of guide the head away, but once I can, I'll try and I'll use gloves if for especially some of the big ones, like the 15-foot Kofi I have, I'll use gloves because I've seen his teeth, and I know that we had a pair of leather gauntlets, and he sliced through about 5 mil of leather on the end of the hand and got about 3-4 mil into my finger. So I was just like, and that was through the gloves, just straight across them, not through the stitches. So we bought a pair of venom defenders for him because that's sort of like gotta be safe for me and safe for him. But like I'll generally just like keep their heads away from me and then get a hands on them, and by that time they start to move away. And what you'll often find is they'll try to hook their head over the lip of a tub, or sorry, not a tub, over the like edge of a branch, and you just slowly like feed their body out further, and as they try to move forward, their head stays in one place and the rest of the body just comes out, and you can lift that and then just slowly lift the head off the branch. And it's sort of very low stress. It's not poking around with hooks trying to like manipulate them with 2 hooks. It's sort of, I find it easy just to keep their head away until I can get hands on, and then once they start moving, it's fine. So it's sort of like a confident, you've got to be confident but aware. But like the minute I know the minute I become too complacent with scrubs, because I get bitten, it's just like they have a way of saying like, you're slipping a bit here, like you've got to buck up your ideas. Like I've had a couple of near misses, and it's just sort of like, right, need to rethink like what I'm doing, go back a bit. But yeah, it's all just sort of like working with the animal. It's not like you're not trying to make it do anything it doesn't want to do, and sort of like make sure any interactions are as positive as possible. That's my ethos anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening.
Oh, okay, and we're back.
I don't know what's happening.
So fuck. And now I'm gonna have to edit this a bunch. But so most people would say that maybe you should keep them in tubs. They're gonna be much easier to work with like that and get out of the enclosure. How do you keep them? Because obviously I know that you don't keep them in tubs.
I'm the big naturalist.
Right. So I want to get kind of more detail. A 10-foot animal, what kind of enclosure is that in? Adults, babies, what's the difference between housing them all, and how are you housing them?
Well, sort of for the 10 for an example for a 10-foot animal, we'd generally be aiming for a 6 by 2 by 3 foot enclosure minimum for a 10-foot animal. Like they do appreciate height, they do appreciate branches. Like we give them a mix of sort of vertical branches screwed in and then horizontal branches. Try and make it as natural as possible. In general, I mean, like it's a bit of a contentious subject about like how much like you interact with the animal, how much you go into clean. Because with my ethics of just sort of like I don't like to handle them unless it's absolutely necessary. With the enclosures the size they are, for just doing simple spot cleaning, something where in a tub you'd have to take the animal out completely, put it somewhere else, and then go through, clean everything, and then put it back in the tub. You'd have to, like with spot cleaning, just with like a good 2-inch layer of substrate. Spot cleaning is just like I can slide open the door, the animal's at the other end, go in, I can just spot clean sort of at my leisure, keeping an eye on what the snake's doing. Some of them will move forward, some of them will just sit and watch. And then for doing a full clean sort of every, because like we'll scoop a big lot of substrate out after like with any feces or whatever, and then we'll add fresh substrate. And then like if I'm feeding them, I'll often just churn all the substrate over, add a bit of fresh stuff. So for a full clean, like full deep disinfectant everything out, would generally be sort of maybe 4 to 5 months for us. And lots of people sort of would say, well, that's like the animals are being sort of like, oh, there's little bits of shed or there's bits of urates. But I found, like, from what I've seen, you put any new snake into a new enclosure, within a couple of hours or the first day, they always defecate. Like, all the time, they always defecate. And I don't know if it's some sort of, whether it's a not like a coping mechanism, but like something about like the smell of the feces, like is a signal, like, okay, I'm in this area. And I know that like with Ari and his research with Boland's, is he's seen around female nests especially lots of scat, lots of feces and shed. So I sort of think there's something about like these biological markers which might help the sort of more nervous species seem more at ease, which is sort of why I don't keep in tubs. And I think that like tubs have their place in the hobby entirely. Like they do have their place. However, for housing large arboreal pythons, I don't think it's sort of it doesn't sit right with me sort of morally, really. Like I'd prefer to see them out doing natural behaviors, not just curled up on a ball in the floor. Like they can perch, they can move, like you can watch them. Like if they're being active, you can sit there, just watch them for an hour or so easily, just watching what they do, how they move around the enclosure. And then for babies, for the neonates that I've managed to breed, I've been raising them in their 12 by 18 by 18 inch enclosures. They're basically small versions of the larger ones. We put small twigs, just like rams put small twigs in there, silicon some of them in place, and then like we get like sprigs of the greenery of just like the fake plants, just tie some of them together, and just like there's the little small adhesive blocks you get for holding wires in place that you just put a cable tie around. We just use those with some of the strands from the greenery, and we just like put them up at the top. They're wedged in, they can't pull them off. They stick pretty well, and there's no adhesive on the outside. And by doing this, we've had basically with the jungle carpets that we've bred and the Irians that we bred this year, as well as the Norta scrubs. We've got them all strike feeding on defrost in those enclosures without having to put them in a smaller enclosure or in a tub to get them to feed. They're up high, they can perch, you're feeding all the time, you're feeding from underneath them, which is more natural than coming in over the top of the hatchling tub. I'm not saying the other way, like the other way works and it's worked for so many people. I'm just saying this is what works for me. And like the snakes the neonates don't seem stressed in there. They sort of act very much like the adults. They spend most of the time perching, and they'll be a lot more active at night.
Now, what are you using as far as a heat source? Are you using light bulbs, and like what are you using for daylight bulbs? Is there UVB or?
Now we've changed over from using sort of the general infrared basking bulbs, the red light ones, to using daylight basking bulbs, which have UVA, and then we have the fluorescent UVB tubes that are mounted with perches close enough that they should get, like, if there is benefit to them, they should be able to get it from where they can perch with the UV tubes. And so the daylight basking bulbs for the large tanks, like because of the weather in Ireland and that not it's not really easy to get, it's not cheap to keep a snake collection over here unless you like specifically design a really, really well insulated room. Um, so they sort of stay on for about 6 to 8 hours in the day, the basking bulbs, and then backup is radiant heat panels just set to a thermostat for a minimum. We have the heat panels right beside the basking light as well, so it's like they have one hot end and they can go down as far as they want to get cool. So that's how we find it works for the large cages, and like some of the large, in I think the 8 foot, the 8 by 2.5 by 4 foot, which we have the breeding pair of sarongs in. I think we've got 3 radiant heat panels along the top as well as a basking bulb, and then we've got the sort of a heat mat underneath giving heat to the hide.
Wow. So there's things at pretty much all angles to ensure the snake can pretty much get wherever he wants at
Lots
whatever
of fail
temperature.
safes too.
Yeah.
It's like if this doesn't work, then there's this there and all that.
And then, I mean, someone's first thing is going to be like, oh, how do I keep humidity in something that large, also with the bulbs running and everything like that? So do you run into humidity problems? If so, how do you keep up the humidity?
The only time we've really ran into humidity problems is sort of like coming into winter where like the heating is on more and in general the house is sort of like drier, and we do increase the spraying. Like we manually spray all the big scrubs. In the one room where we have most of the large scrubs, we do have a pump system set up to spray all of them at once. And that usually we do it maybe once a week over summer, sort of just a very light mist once a week. When it comes to winter, maybe twice a week we'll be doing slightly heavier sprays, especially coming up to a shed cycle. But we found mostly with just with thinking about how you're setting up a stack of enclosures, like you've got a heat source from underneath you, you've got a small gap between the bibs, and then what we aim to do is put the water bowl over the heat source from beneath, so that helps just evaporate that a bit faster, keep the humidity up. I like stuff like cork tubes, and the substrate holds humidity really well. So like we do get into, like, there are sometimes we've ran into problems and we've had like a couple of animals get like a bad shed even though we've been spraying it, and we're sort of like we're not entirely sure why, whether it's sort of like the air is getting a bit drier or it's particularly cold and the heating's just coming on a bit more. But in general, we don't really suffer with many humidity problems with how much it rains in Ireland. We don't really have an issue with that.
Well, I was just about to ask maybe a dumb question, but what's the climate like over there?
It's mainly it lives up to the stereotype of raining most of the time to some point. I mean, like, now we're experiencing more extremes of weather, like most places. Like this summer we had sort of like 6-8 weeks of sort of like 27, 28 degree weather, which we'd never usually get. To get it that hot for that long, there'd be a couple of weeks, but not as long as it was this time. I mean, we were had all the windows open, we had all the heat sources off, like, and we were, even then the tanks in the house were getting to sort of up to 28, 29 with no heating turned on. In general, I think it helps. It's an advantage to us. Is we have it's a lot of changing weather systems, so it'll be like drier and clear for a short period of time, and then it'll come in raining a lot more, and it'll be like the change from high to low pressure.
Why?
Okay. Well, basically, does rain have an effect on humidity? That was a dumb question. Yes,
Yeah,
it
that was a
does.
very dumb question. Good thing we got online by the time you asked that.
We were still hearing as dumb question.
Yeah, rain's water.
Shut up.
Okay.
So, but you think that would affect his humidity, but he's not having any issues.
No, he's saying that it stays high enough. That the issue would be it would be too dry.
Gotcha.
Moving on. What ended up being the scrubs that you bred, and have you bred others since then? How many clutches of scrubs have you had?
I've had 2 clutches of scrubs so far. So the first one was the Highland scrubs, or the Tamika Oxterville, whichever name you want to use, that whoever is using in the pet trade at the minute. They were the first ones I bred, and then last year, or this year, sorry, I bred the dwarf species of scrubs, the Norta, the Timor Islands, and it looks hopefully by the end of November we'll have a 3rd clutch here, so that'll be sort of like 3 years with 3 clutches, or 2 years with 3 clutches, hopefully.
And that's out of how many adult pairings that you've tried out?
Adult pair that I've tried out, I think, over with being the same pairings, I think I've tried 4 pairings overall, adult wise. Some of them like go with the good and bad. One female got a brain tumor, and she had, I think, 3.5 centimeter follicles. She was like literally on the point of ovulating.
Wow.
Another one was also building follicles, and she got osteomyelitis, which seems to be quite a common thing in scrubs. It's a bone infection. And it seems to affect their spines. And one way for it to get in is like if a piece of undigested bone or something nicks the intestine, the bacteria gets into the bloodstream, and it can like start an infection in the spine, which is what happened to that female. So they were the first 2 scrub pairs that I tried, and unfortunately they both went south, sort of for natural causes, sort of like what the brain tumor one was, just sort of like completely out of the blue. One day she was fine, 2 days later she fed, 2 days later she had a lump on her head. Of course, bring her into the vets, get ultrasound, get x-rays. The vet in Ireland that we use, he's good. He is experienced with reptiles, but he's also learned a lot with us, and he's a lot more confident now because he's used to dealing with sort of like ball pythons and corn
or just not a scrub. Yeah, that's a very rare animal to get in.
It's sort of like a small vet clinic in the west of Ireland, and suddenly you got this guy bringing in this like 13-foot scrub python to get a swab taken.
Jesus.
I don't know why.
I'm not sure if this is the internet here or.
The curse is back.
We didn't tell anyone.
That's true. We did announce it prior.
But we've been doing that lately where we announce it the day of. But
yeah, which
we didn't
you would
tell
think you would be safe if you.
Yeah, we didn't tell anyone the day before.
Yeah.
I wanted to, but I didn't. I literally held myself off from telling Brandon that we were having him on, because I was nervous of the curse. But something still.
The curse lives on in its own way.
I don't know, but I think he's back.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if it's the internet here. I'm trying to see if I need to put it onto a hotspot on my phone, because I'm not sure if it's the internet here. I mean, it has full signal, so Not
It's
sure what's going
probably
on.
it's probably us or YouTube.
I don't know.
literally
It makes
have
no
idea.
sense. We're usually good, but last time we did a live, that whole like worldwide YouTube shutdown happened. So
Yeah. So who knows?
we're cursed, but it's all right.
Okay, so where were we?
Brain tumors.
And vets and scrub 13-foot animals in the vet.
Yeah, so he's sort of like he's definitely like grown with us. He hasn't sort of there's nothing we've sort of like gone in and said like, no, I'm not gonna have a look at this. Like he's always, as long as basically I'm in control of the head, he's fine doing whatever, and like he's definitely been a big help, and sort of like he'll go and he'll look up stuff, he'll forward things to other vets. One of the vets we work with, who's a close personal friend in the UK, probably one of the best exotic vets in the UK. And for the sort of extreme cases, like where we thought the brain tumor was actually an abscess that we were going to have to get operated to get removed, so we took the snake to the UK from Ireland, boarded her while they started to treat her and do tests, and then unfortunately she started going downhill, and then like she passed away, got all the tests on, came back as a brain tumor, which was like something just completely unexpected. But it seems to be something that's more common. I mean, I've had, I think, 3 cases now of cancer, like a brain tumor, a heart tumor, and leukemia in scrubs. And I know
What?
other people have had, like, there's one guy, he lost a small group of, I think it was 4 cluster lepers that also all had tumors. So I know that it seems to be quite a big quite a high cause of mortality, and I think we're only just starting to see that now as people are sort of going, right, well, we need to get a test done, find out why that animal died.
Those are things that seemingly, I don't know. I mean, why do you think is there any reason to why they're seemingly predisposed to get cancer or tumors or
I
all
can't
this stuff?
I wouldn't know. I mean, like, if we know that like green tree pythons, they also seem to be quite prone to getting cancer, but I think possibly like before, when animals like just die and like you don't go and you don't get them tested for, like an animal that like suddenly, like the one that had leukemia, outwardly appeared fine, was basking, moving, eating as normal, everything was perfect. One day I left to go to Dublin at 6 o'clock, get a phone call from my dad at 9:30 going, just walked in, he's like limp on the floor completely, and was just like 4 hours had gone from perching to being dead. Just like complete change, and everything else, he wasn't emaciated, and it was just leukemia had gradually just worked through all of the major organs until it just caused a final like major shutdown. So like some animals that just seem to like roll for no reason, and people say, oh, it just died. It's like, well, you need to go and like get a histopathology and a post-mortem done, find out why that animal died. Just don't just say it was nature. It's like find out what went wrong. So like for us, like working with that many animals, if one goes down, you need to know why, because you're just like, if this is something that like I've managed to bring into the collection, like we go through 6 months quarantine here for the animals, but even so, you're just like, you want to make sure that like everything else is fine with the animal. So like I know that fat reserves and everything, like the animals aren't overweight, they aren't emaciated. Everything else was fine with him. All the other organs were still perfectly fine, apart from just the fact that he had leukemia. So I know that at least that part of my keeping is the other side of my keeping is like, yeah, they're in good health. This was the one reason why it died, not for something that I caused. So it is important to find out what happens to these animals, just even if like they don't exhibit any outward signs of being ill when they die. It's just go and check it. Don't just say, it just happened.
So I think I have to ask the question that everyone's thinking. So you wear gloves, you don't handle the animal, you kind of always watch out for the sharp end of it, and they randomly drop dead and get all these tumors and cancers and all
bite
this
you in the
types of
thigh.
things. How do you still work with scrubs? Why?
How do you keep
And,
that
like,
love after all
yeah.
this?
It's been tough, and like after after you get a big loss like that, especially if it's sort of like a big breeder female or a female that was going to breed, and you're sort of like, they were the first 2 times I tried to breed scrubs, and these 2 things happened, and at that point you do hit a low, and you're just like, I can't be bothered doing this anymore. And like, yeah, I've been to the point I've like, after I lost one of them, I'd like written out a whole post just like, everything is for sale, listed everything ready to go, and I didn't post it. I was just like, gonna hold off on it, and just like took some time away from Facebook and away from the social media side of the hobby. I just got back to the roots of working with the animals. And just like, as I got working with them more, I realized like, no, I still have this passion. I want, like, scrubs are just the one thing that I found that I'm just like, no matter what setbacks I encounter, like I've had a rough start of it with some of the cases, like the cancers and that. So I'm just like, at least I haven't gone a couple years with nothing bad happening, and then thinking, right, I'm breeding, I'm good, I'm on top of this, and then suddenly something like that happening and kicking it back. It's like, right, I've experienced the shit side of the hobby, and I know that it's that side, and I know that this is part of, like, as my dad said, you keep livestock, you get dead stock. It's just how it works. So it was just like, it was tough to sort of think of a reason, like, why am I going to carry on with these? Like, I mean, the whole thing of working with them, like, I love the fact that they have a bit of fight to them. I love the fact that they're a bit of a challenge. But as far as going down, like, okay, you've had losses, like you've had the cancers or whatever, it's just a case of like, I know that this is what I really want to do. I want to really sort of like make a good impact on these animals in captivity. And make sure that there's a sustainable captive population in Europe. So like, we're not relying as heavily on wild caught animals. Now, for me, wild caught animals are an important piece of the hobby, and I think that people who say, why buy wild caught instead of buying captive bred, I'm like, well, you got to get new bloodlines in somewhere. Like, you've got to get fresh lines into the animals that you're breeding, and sometimes you just don't have a choice. Like, some scrub localities haven't been bred that often, like maybe 6 times in captivity they've been bred, like over 20-30 years, this one locality. So yeah, you need to get wild caught animals. It's the only way you're going to manage to sort of like create a population in captivity. And the fact that these animals aren't coming up that often as wild caught shows that they're not being they're not over collected. Like, there's not tons of sort of oxable animals coming out. There's 2 or 3 occasionally. Mostly what we're seeing is Laurentes and Barnecks.
Demand?
Sorry?
Or is it from demand, or just there's no collectors out there?
I think some of it is just is like what is selling. So Sarongs and the Northern Barnecks, they're very in your face. They're very, like, the pattern is very bold, so they're quite popular. The other localities, like the Oxabills and sort of some of the more obscure islands, like the Arrow Islands, aren't visually as in your face, but I think they're still magnificent animals. Like, I mean, Highlands are probably my favorite. Just something about the sort of the orange banding, and I think it's more a case of just like, I know that I think it's the green tree collectors don't go to Kofiau anymore. I think it is because they can't find enough animals to make it worthwhile. And I'm not sure if that's it for the scrubs sort of on mainland Papua, or whether it's just getting to the regions where they actually are is the main difficulty.
Now, I guess I have to ask, do you have Halmaheras? If you do not, do you plan to? Can you find them?
I'd agreed to buy a pair of Halmaheras about, I think this was 2.5 years ago. Agreed to buy a pair 3 days before I was due to go to the UK to collect them. They'd been 6 months in captivity. 3 days before I was due to collect them, the female dropped dead.
Wow, dude, you got some bad luck.
I hadn't paid any money at that time. It was just like, it was a verbal agreement. I was going to pay cash on collection, and from that point, I was put off. There were a couple of wild caught Traciers came up from the importer. They were all adults, and I said, well, I'll wait till they're young animals. If I'm going to get them, I'm going to wait, and I'm going to get young specimens if I can. hopefully in the future it is something I would like to work on. But I mean, there's a couple of guys out there I think who are really close to cracking them. And I think like within the next 2 years, we're probably going to see some captive bred success with the Halmahares, I think.
Now, are you one of the people who thinks that, I mean, stress is a large component, not, I mean, of every scrub, but I mean, especially Halmahares?
Yeah, I think the main thing with these animals is minimal contact, like especially females. Females, for whatever reason, seem to be a lot more highly prone to stress than the males. Like females take a while to sort of get settled into sort of like where they're ready for breeding, whereas males will try and lock like the first year they're there. Like I mean, we had the Naughty pair which I bred this year. We've had locks for I think 2 years before that, with nothing else coming of it. But then I decided I completely redid the female's enclosure. Like she was a very shy animal, only ever drop fed, struck fed occasionally. And I just completely redid the whole enclosure, added like 3 or 4 more vertical and horizontal branches, loads more greenery. So she just had an abundance of cover. Soon after that, it was like a new animal had been like put in there. She was strike feeding. She was coming out cruising, whereas before she'd sort of like dart back away if you walked by. Like this time, she was coming out to the front of the cage, which was something she'd never done before. So I think sort of like meeting the animals' needs is a main part of them, and just giving them the opportunity to do what they would do in the wild. Like you give the animals the space, the opportunity, the right conditions, like they will breed. I don't think there's a magic button that you have to press for them. I mean, like the sarongs, just we were cohabiting them, which is another big contentious issue now. Is cohabiting is like the end all of keeping. It's the biggest keeping sin you can do. Um, Despite a lot of very experienced like zookeepers and that swearing by cohabitation as a way to breed these sort of less commonly bred species. The sarongs started going. I hadn't altered the feeding, hadn't cooled them down, hadn't done anything. They started locking after we went from the really hot, dry summer into the cooler, rainier period. They literally started locking the day that that change happened. So for me, I just think it's like possibly not having the males in long enough leads to people like missing that window. Like I'm sort of now like second guessing myself, going, well, when I saw them lock, should I have done all my other pairings? Like, should I have put them all in then, or should I wait until sort of the normal season?
Time,
That
right?
yeah, the normal time to do it, because like no one would be at like November time. I'm thinking like just putting my animals together, but instead I'm expecting a clutch to be laid. So it's a weird one to say like how seasonal are the areas where these animals come from. Like there's really two main seasons. It's sort of like, yeah, depending on where they are, like northern animals seem to have less of a like I've been talking to Brandon Wheeler about this, and he's like looked at the sort of climate data, and he said like, look at Morocco, they have a bigger temperature drop in winter than the sarongs do. Sarongs are sort of pretty even throughout the whole time period. Like the temperatures are pretty even. So like maybe they don't really have as much as a season, or don't need cooling down as much as the Morocco's do.
So how much, when you have animals like this, like how much of it is taking information from other people and like say this is when breeding season is, this is what you do, and how much is like observing the individual animal?
Like I went through a period like when I first like started keeping, and I went and I was talking to as many people as I could about them, like whoever had kept them, whoever had bred them. Um, like when I first picked up my first scrub from the guy in the UK who'd bred them, I was talking to him like an hour, 2 hours at his house about like what he did to breed them. So even from when I got the first animal, I knew breeding was what I wanted to do, and was getting information from him on what he did. Carl Green spoke a lot to David Means and a couple of the other guys, and everybody has their own differing opinions of like what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and like this has worked for him, and like okay, I've followed the cooling thing and it's worked for some of the animals, it hasn't worked for others. Some of the animals have just done it on their own accord. So I think a lot of it is paying attention to what that female is telling you. Like if you notice she's starting to stay down the cooler end of the enclosure around the time that you think, like, should I be doing introductions? She stays down the cool end, likely she's building follicles. So that's the time to put the male in, like put the male in then. And I think also from what I found is introducing a male and then pulling him after a couple of days of no activity and then doing this cycle continually. For me, I found that it just stressed both animals out. The female was more stressed, male was more stressed. So we came up, like, it's not an original idea, like zoos have been doing it for years, of just like two adjoining enclosures with a door to pull out. And that seemed to work. I pull the door out. If the male is interested, the male goes in there within an hour. Like it was for the oxybills, like the door was pulled within 10 minutes. The male was into the female within an hour. They were locking. So it's sort of like, if you can get that signal just on time, you don't need to do this pulling a male out. And even after they've locked, pulling a male to give him a rest, from what I've seen with the scrubs, the male will generally lock about once every week to 2 weeks, and he won't try in between those. It's just like you can almost set your calendar by it. It's like that weekend, 10 days later, 10 days after that. It's very sort of very even. There's not like a period of intense breeding activity where he's trying to do it every day and then nothing. It just seems to be sort of a sustained thing, and I don't feel that you need to pull, like if the male isn't trying to continually lock with the female and the female isn't trying to get away, I don't feel there's any need to pull a male out. And I know a lot of people who've bred a lot more species than I have would say, oh, it helps stimulate the male. And from my experience, I haven't seen that to be the case. They do sort of like, they have their own program to it. They'll lock, they'll break. There's no need to pull the male out. Like for me, it's just adding more stress, which you don't need at that particular time.
So how long are you leaving that door open in between the two enclosures?
Sometimes for the oxybills, I think when I bred them, I opened the door in November, I think it was, and I left them, and sort of like we'd seen lots, and I basically left them together for about 4 months because they were continually locking over this time period. Like it was a continual, like every 10 days to 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden, like saw she was looking really swollen, and then was separating them out when I was getting them back onto feed. So separated them out, fed the male, fed the female ate as well. She ate right up until 6 weeks before she laid, and I stopped feeding her at that point because I was just like, I don't want to cause any issues. So it was like she was on really small rats for a snake of her size, sort of like a 10-foot snake on small rats or large wiener rats, just keeping them ticking over. And after I fed them, and the male ate continually through like the breeding cycle, like as soon as I warmed it back up and they were still locking, he ate as well, and she was eating, and they were still copulating. There was no difference there. And then after I fed them one time, after she ovulated, took out the door, the male didn't go in at all. So I was just like, right, well, he's lost interest. As it, like every time before, he'd been in there within sort of an hour, like just gone straight down from his perch and into the female's enclosure.
I wonder why it takes them so many times to get the job done.
All snakes.
Well, some of them are, but then I think we saw 3 locks with the sarongs, and that seems to have been fine. And I think with the jungles we bred last year, we didn't even see a lock, and we got eggs. Like they were cohabiting in a 6x2x3 and hadn't done anything to them, and we've been cohabiting them for about 3 years. Hadn't tried to breed them, wasn't really high up on the list of species to breed. And then suddenly I just saw her one day sitting on the ground. I was sort of like, all right, that looks a bit odd. Went back there the sort of the same night. She was still there, and I thought, I wonder if something was going on there. So I just like got the flashlight, just like lifted up the coils, and I was like, oh, right, okay. She's like, didn't see an ovulation, didn't see a lock. That was just pure luck. The snakes were in together. like didn't see anything happen, but ended up with a nice little clutch of jungle carpets.
Wow. Yeah. So, I mean, I had said before that we weren't going to talk scrubs that much, but we ended up talking like an hour about it. But I mean, like, obviously you like to talk about them. So we're curious about them, even though I just listened. So if no one's heard it, Laurence was on NPR. And so all you guys go over to NPR because they need a from the ground up bump because Eric's really jealous that this is Matt Minatola's favorite podcast. So if you guys could go over and make Eric happy and listen to Laurence's episode on NPR because he talks like in depth. He talks the whole 2 hours on scrubs. Even though we just talked an hour, I try not to hit the same exact things. We hit some of them, but I really want to talk about Timors. And so are you doing similar things with your Timor Pythons as you're doing your scrubs?
Yeah, we've had them they've been with us for about 3.5 years now, and they're approximately 8 years old. They were brought in as wild caughts in 2010, raised up slowly. We bought them from the same guy as a lot of the scrubs, the adult pair, and then a smaller captive bred pair from Europe as well. And we were keeping them in 4x2x2s. We'd sort of been told like they're quite shy, they'll only drop feed in small enclosures. So we sort of stuck with that for 2 years, 3 years. And then sort of like I'd read the Barker's piece on Timors and saying like they often needed a larger enclosure. So I thought, right, well, I tried breeding them in the 4x2x2s when they were 7, and then decided for this year going to completely upgrade it, put them into, each of them has basically a 4x2x3 foot vib each, and then the doors are removed all the time now, apart from when they're fed, when we just wait for them to go into the 2 enclosures and then just put the door in. Haven't seen anything with them, but the male is definitely sort of like he is sticking close to the female, like they're always curled up on the same shelf together now, which is what I saw with the water pythons last year. Like the male stuck to her, no locks were seen, like the tails were close but never actually locking. And then with the water pythons, it was like pure luck. I'd left them in for 2 weeks longer than I'd sort of been told to. They were like, if they haven't done anything by end of December, take them out. And I was just busy with college stuff, and I left them in for another 2 weeks. And during those 2 weeks, we had a power cut and a really heavy storm around mid-January, and we sort of had a power cut for 2 days. And we've backup generators which are wired into the mains for the house. So we just like have 2 8 kilowatt generators running, and they'll run backup heaters. They'll run like just room heaters if we need to, and they will run sort of like the basking bulbs and fluorescents as well. Usually we just sort of like leave it to basking bulbs during the day and just knock the fluorescents off to make sure we're not pulling too much out of the generators. But with them, just like power cut, room dropped down to about 17 degrees. Big storm came in after a long clear time, and it was like someone had flicked a switch. It was just like all of a sudden came down that morning. They were properly locking for the first time after sticking together, and then they continued to lock for another couple of weeks until she ovulated. So that was like pure luck. I had them in, I left them in too long. There was a power cut, and whatever it was, the change in pressure, the temp dropped down another couple of degrees from what I'd kept them at. Just whatever it was signaled the male off, and he started to copulate with the female. So that was just pure chance, and that was just a happy coincidence.
So, I mean, it seems like there's certain things that interrupt and like obviously reset the whole clock and put the cycle into, I don't know what you'd call it, but like, you'd be scared to do that yourself.
Right. I was
like,
just asking that. If it worked out, even though it was a coincidence, you
don't want to repeat it, do you?
I don't
or
know.
Is that something to think about?
I mean, it's something I think about carefully, and I know that like that temperature was only experienced sort of like in the room. Like the animal still had a backup heat source, like they still had a backup heat source, but obviously just it was very cold there, and sort of like, actually I think that was because they were in a stack. We had the red bulbs on. Or we just had like basking bulbs on, but because they were in a stack, we sort of put bottom on and then the top one on and just monitor the second one's temperature with how much heat is coming up from below, and we just closely monitor that. And if it's getting too cold, we just like flick them over if the generators are running a bit on the edge of their power output. But I'd consider doing it possibly just for like one night, not an extended period of time. Like, I mean, I've been told, I was told for like scrubs, like drop them down to sort of 18 degrees for like a week or two at night and keep them up general basking. And I don't think that's the way to go. But with the water pythons being further in Australia, there is more seasonality. So I would think that like everybody I spoke to said, well, it mimics the time that they'd be breeding, sort of like rainy season, lots of heavy rain, colder. So it is something I consider trying again. Yeah, just like for one night, just let the temps drop down, just unplug the heating from that enclosure completely, and just let temps go down to 17, and then just see if that spurred them off again.
Yeah. And I think it's weird because a lot of our reptiles that we keep do experience, rainy seasons and drier seasons, or, it's basically all pretty humid all the way around. But I mean, I don't feel like there's anyone trying to mimic a rainy season. Do you think there's any merit to it? Would you try it? I mean, it seems like you get a boost off of your own climates. I mean, the pressure and everything, like that's what's really is the factor.
Yeah, I mean, in general, like for us, I mean, in general, when it comes to the breeding season, because it's winter and as I said, like with humidity problems, we do spray a little bit more in general. So perhaps in some way that's almost mimicking a rainy season for some of the animals. But as far as like setting up timers and having everything automatically done, I'm not sure. I think the pressure aspect is more important than actually a physical rain aspect to it. I mean, maybe for maybe for species like bolins, I think maybe that because of where they are in the highlands and like there's lots of cloud systems there, I think maybe for something like the bolins, that added trigger might help more. Sort of like have a system or a cage where you can have a really heavy downpour, and just like and it can drain away, or it doesn't like hold the humidity. Sort of like do a real big cage with sort of one end that has this sort of like misting system and another end that's a lot drier, which doesn't. So maybe for bolins something like that could trigger it, but for the other pythons, I haven't seen any correlation between me misting an enclosure and getting increased breeding activity. They seem to just rely more on the atmospheric pressure. It seems to me anyway.
Yeah. Now, I mean, someone who's so deep into things like scrubs and Timors, I mean, you mentioned bolins. I mean, logically, you would think that's something that you would like to have. Is that something in your future?
It's been something I've been thinking about, and sort of like I saw bolins, and like you fall for like some people like they're the Rolls Royce of pythons, and like they're the pinnacle of python keeping, and I'm like, for me, Owen Pellies are the pinnacle of python keeping. Like I know I'm never gonna get to keep a pair
Soon,
over here,
maybe.
but I wish. But like I know I'm never gonna get to keep a pair over here, but unless I manage to set up a zoo, if I win the lottery and go through and get all the zoo licenses. But Owen Pellies for me would be the pinnacle. If I was ever to move down to Australia, I'd do whatever I would have to get a permit to keep Owen Pellies. Like it'd just be one of those things. Like if I'm down there, I'm gonna try them. For bolins, I've been tempted with a couple of them that have come up, and I just sort of, apart from the price, just like the price would either be just when I bought someone's, like I just bought 6 scrubs or something, and I'd just be like, well, I've got I'm focused on the scrubs, I want to work on them, so there's no point in with bolins with the snake that's so different for their captive husbandry. It seems I don't think there's I wouldn't feel right, because I wouldn't be able to give them the time to really like get to learn that species as well as scrubs at the same time in future. Yeah, definitely something that I'd want to work with, but not so much as because there's a hype about them and there's the mystique, and that more just the fact that they present a challenge. I like a challenge, and so like they present a big challenge for the community, sort of like halmahares do, of not much captive breeding. Like for the halmahares, no captive breeding. They represent a challenge which I sort of like just like to sort of like try my own ideas with. And I'm not saying like, oh, I'd magically breed Bolans the first time, but I've got ideas that sort of I know what I would do if I was working with them. So it is something I'd like to look at getting in the future, but for now, scrub pythons are just the one thing I'm focused on. And as you can tell, they're the one species for me, which just everything is. It's all about them. It's sort of like they're the one species I want to find out more, want to like breed sort of as much as I can. They're just sort of they are the one species that just holds everything for me. They're lean, they're fast, they're a challenge. What most people would consider or wouldn't consider a fun snake to own.
Yeah, if you don't like dodging an open snake mouth.
When you just say lean fast, that doesn't sound too bad. If you cut out all the other stuff.
Yeah, I mean it's a very surprisingly agile snake for being so large. I think that's what's interesting about it.
Yeah, like the I had the 15-foot Kofi I was in, like when we brought them back from the UK, we housed them temporarily just in tubs, transport tubs, like at my flat in Dublin when I was living there. And we had to have them there for about a week until we could get transport back home for them. And like we had them in there, and I was spot cleaning the big one day, like I was getting food into them and was spot cleaning him. And for a 15-foot snake, he can move fast. He was out of the tub and around the nearest armchair in about 3 seconds. And I'm thinking, this is a 15-foot animal that weighs 15 kilos ish, and just like completely just out the gate coiled. And that was like, right, okay, I've definitely got to, like, a nice large enclosure for him was a must, just because he does tend to flee more. So it's sort of like he can move surprisingly quickly. And as far as strike range is concerned, like I've had an 8-foot, 9-foot female barneck launch horizontally across a 4-foot viv and reach a foot outside it. So they can strike when they want to. They can strike easily, sort of like half their body length if they really want to. So they are something you have to be aware of when you're working with them.
Yeah, that's awesome and frightening all at the same time.
Yeah.
So you touched on it a little bit, but as far as in Europe getting import animals, for us it's kind of different. You know, someone in Florida gets it and then they ship it to you. It seems like a lot more difficult to buy from an importer there. So how do you go about getting those like imported scrubs and stuff like that?
Most of the imported scrubs I get come from Germany. There's like a couple of importers in Europe that I would use, and generally I'd email them, sort of keep in contact, see what they have when. And in general, we just like they'd be going to like Ham or Houghton, one of the big snake shows over in Europe, and we know a couple of people who go and who run a good courier service, so we get them couriered back to Dublin docks in Ireland from the shows, and then we just drive back across Ireland with the snakes, and we just have like car batteries with a inverter, which we can just like we can put a thermostat probe into one of the tubs, and then we just have heat mats set underneath them for as many as we need, and so that's how we transport them back. So it is, and like if you're driving to the UK, to sort of like for the Timors and for the Oxabills, we drove to the UK, and you're sort of thinking like 1,600-kilometer round trip in about 3 days to like pick up some of these snakes. It's like
what is that in miles?
I don't know what it is in miles, but very long.
Okay.
Like 2,000 miles? I don't know.
Oh, wow.
It's, yeah, I'm not
How
sure
many hours did it take you?
There
I guess
go.
that would be
That's
good
something
judge.
we all, everyone across the world uses hours, thankfully.
It's well, I suppose it takes sort of 3.5-4 hours for us to drive from where we live to Dublin to the port, and then another couple 4 hours or so on the ferry over to the UK, and then from where this guy was, from where we got the ferry to, I think he was something like a 6-hour drive
Wow.
down. So it's sort of like we go over, we leave, like say we left on a Monday, we'd be over in the UK sort of like Tuesday morning, getting off the ferry down to his by sort of midday, leaving his around 4 o'clock, driving back to the docks, getting to the docks at 10, back onto the ferry at midnight, back over in Ireland at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and then and then just back and like either drive straight back over home, or when I was living in Dublin, to the flat to get all the snakes on heat mats, and then just crash out for a couple of hours and then drive back. So it's a lot of work when you want for some animals, but like for those animals, I hadn't ever handled an adult scrub before. So I went down to him and I said, look, this one, like he warned me, this one is like top 5% of the nastiest scrubs he's had. And like that was going to be my first sub-adult, like my first venture into anything over, any scrub over like 2 foot. And sort of like my first venture into an 8 foot snake. And went down and I went in with the attitude of like, if I think this animal is too much for me and I'm not going to be able to work with her safely and keep her well, then I'm not going to take her. You can keep the deposit. We've driven this way, but you can keep her. Like I went in with the attitude of if I don't think I can do this, then I will let you know. I'm not going to take her and then 2 weeks later go back saying, oh, she's just lacerated my arm. Like you should have told me. You should have done this. Or like, well, you're getting into scrubs. You know what you're getting into.
Mhm.
So yeah, it can be. But for that, he was like the guy I bought them off, Jim Weatherall. He was he runs. I think he's still keeping Ouroboros Herpetological on Facebook. Like some stunning. He had some proper stunning animals, and he basically like spent a day with me working up from his most docile scrubs to his most aggressive scrubs, showing me how to hook and tail them, how to handle them safely. So I owe a lot to him for like spending that time to sort of like teach me how to work with the animals safely. And then from then it was just learning how I should work with each individual animal, because each one's different. Some don't respond well to hooks. Some I can reach in with a bare hand and just lift out without getting bitten. Like I know the animals enough to say like, well, I can read the animal. If it's going to come towards me, okay, yeah, that's likely to get a bite. But if I can touch it and it sort of just doesn't really shift or move, I can usually just like gently scoop it up slowly and then just get it up, and then it's fine.
Yeah. Now, for all the Americans listening, and my terrible guess before, it's 990 miles, so it's not even close to what I said. So I want to clear that up. It's because the chat converted for us. But what were you gonna say?
Okay, so I don't know if you said this, or I'm just kind of making an assumption. Is the reason you didn't get this animal shipped to you because you wanted to handle it? Like you drove all that just because
Or
you
was
wanted
it
to handle
necessity?
it, or did you?
Part of it was because the guy had said to me, he said, like, if you're going to get this animal, if I'm going to sell it to you, I really want you to come over and collect it. And, like, just so, because he didn't want someone coming back to him going, this animal's done this animal's done that. Like he said, like, I just want to make sure that she's going to go to a place that is going to be good for her, and, like, you can handle her and that. So there was part of that. And also you can't really get a courier from the UK to Ireland unless it's coinciding with one of the shows, which it wasn't. It was just sort of like in between the shows. And the guy needed to sort of like get the animals out reasonably quickly, but he didn't mind holding on a couple of weeks or like a couple of months while we sorted out the ferries. But it was really just like, unless it's going to a show, you can't get a courier back to the UK. Just like
Really?
you can't post snakes. Like, no, I think if you went like, the courier companies over here have problems shipping us don't like shipping us frozen prey, because they can't guarantee it will be frozen when it arrives. This is a beauty. This is a beauty of living in Ireland. Sort of
Wait,
like,
it's 2018. People ship frozen things all the time. Like what?
it's completely different. It's just like if they're shipping from Northern Ireland to Southern Ireland, one courier company will do it overnight. But it's just like all the food is in a poly box with a load of like cold packs stuffed around it, and just relying on the fact it's going to stay cold enough in the poly box. It's just an ordinary van driving down. There's no demand for big frozen courier vans or like frozen like freezer trucks going up and down just for like stuff like this. So it is difficult and it's a challenge to sort of do it. And we've sort of thought about breeding our own.
And now, does it extend the laws to not feed live? I know that that's a thing in England, which I'm guessing extends to the whole UK. But can you feed live where you are, or what's the deal with that?
I think you can feed live if it's a case of like life and death for the snake itself. I'm not really like, I've never had to do it myself, and in general, it's just sort of like it's not, as far as I know, it is illegal like it is in the UK. It is illegal over here unless it's sort of life and death for the other animal. But it's just something I try to avoid anyway.
Yeah. Now,
Unless I absolutely had to for one of the young snakes, but so far I've been lucky. I haven't needed one that needed anything live.
it doesn't sound, I mean, for a place here, it's a common story to where you, like, as a kid, you used to find garter snakes in your yard, and that's why you're into snakes. Now you live in Ireland where there's 0 snakes. Now, do you think that impacts the fact that there doesn't seem to be much of a reptile scene there, or like, how is the reptile scene there in general?
The reptile scene here is like, it seemed to be like when I started like 4 or 5 years ago, there seemed to be sort of like there's definitely a small core of people keeping some really high end stuff, like quite a lot of people who like don't use Facebook, and they're keeping a lot of really nice stuff. And in general, like we've had like 2 reptile expositions in Ireland now. Like we've had 2 reptile shows in Ireland itself, which sort of like have only happened in the past 2 years, and they've grown. They went from sort of being in a small sports hall to sort of being in one of the national centers. So it has really exploded, and there's definitely a growing number of people keeping reptiles in Ireland. However, keeping the more like not commonly kept species, there's sort of a small handful of people sort of going that way, and there's a small number. I think there's about 9 or 10 like private venomous keepers in the south of Ireland. But over here, like we don't have any licenses. Like you don't need any license for venomous. You don't need any license for crocs. Like as long as you can get it legally, you can keep it.
Is it just kind of like there's not a significant number of people working with it, so it's like they haven't
they don't care
realized
yet.
that they should make laws about it yet?
Yeah, like nothing has happened for them to go, oh, okay, we need to put a law in, or oh, we need to start like they've raised taxes on everything else. They haven't realized that if they could tax about 10 or 12 more people for keeping venomous if they decided to introduce a license. But
yeah.
In general, it's not really anything that anybody worries about. There hasn't been an incident over here of someone being bitten or anything like that. So that's sort of helped keep the community in the good books. And there's only been sort of 1 or 2 situations of like a snake found that's got out or that someone has dumped. So it doesn't really make mainstream media over here.
And you know that animal's not going to survive also.
Yeah, like if someone's dumping the animal there, like they know that they're not going to survive.
Yeah. Now, I mean, we talked about it earlier before the podcast, but there was obviously Casper put on the Scandinavian Herpetological Symposium. So I heard that you had gone over there, which I believe is Denmark, correct?
Yeah, Denmark, yeah.
And kind of what happened there, kind of who'd you get to meet and what'd you talk about?
Well, like I got to meet Mark O'Shea, which was sort of like a big thing for me. Like I'd always watched O'Shea's Big Adventures and that. I got to meet him and have a small talk about like scrub pythons and sort of like some of my ideas of like where is there any sort of like speciation level difference, and sort of like talk to him and hear his side of that. And then I got to talk to I met Daniel Bennett, who's done a lot of work on like the Bosque monitors, and then it's one of the other Varanus species. I think it's the Philippines water monitor. I think one of the Varanid species. And then sort of like got to meet Ari, and sort of like spent a lot of time talking to Ari and Frederick sort of about bolins and especially Ari about his travels over to Papua. And of course, like, I was just trying to sort of pick his brains on, like, have you ever come across a scrub in the wild, and like, when are you guys gonna like move off Boland's and go and do a scrub book? Like, because we need someone out there who's actually going out to this place to like produce a proper scrub book, not like just relying on locality data all the time and what so and so says the animal is, and this is what this animal looks like. It's just like, no, we need someone who's gone over there, done the groundwork over there. So yeah, I mean, it was very well organized, and it was very professional but quite informal. You had time to go up and meet the speakers between when they were talking. Like, you got to go up, meet them. You had 10 or 15 minutes good conversation with them. So like, it was very well organized, and I think for next year, like, Casper's got another one planned for next year. I think that he hopes to be bigger, and I think if you can come over to Denmark to go and see it, like, definitely worth the trip. It was a very, very good event, and everybody sort of there was very friendly. There's like, no matter who you were talking to, sort of like Henrik Herold, who runs Randa Zoo in Denmark, Randa's tropical rainforest. I got to talk to him about the work that they're doing in Ecuador as well. Like, they've just bought a reserve, an area of land where they're doing like wildlife studies over there of what actual species are in this area of the rainforest near one of the national parks.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a great opportunity, especially for someone like you. I mean, the amount of knowledge that some people like that have, especially someone like Mark O'Shea, who, I mean, he may be one of the only guys you've had contact with who's seen him in the wild, right? I mean, did you get to talk to him about that?
Yeah, like, I unfortunately not as in depth as I would have liked to. I mean, there's so many things, and like, everybody's there, and like, because of what he's done, like, he is celebrity status, like, he's superstar status in like the herp world. Not as much as I would like to have gone into depth with him, so I hope that I can sort of like find another time to sort of pick his brains further about it. But yeah, like, really, really, what I was overwhelmed with someone so new to keeping. I've been keeping 4 years, was just how sort of like friendly and open all these guys were. Like, these guys have been keeping 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years. And they're just like, they're more than welcoming to someone who's been keeping 4 years, but like, you want to learn, you're asking like good questions and stuff, like, and they were just overwhelmingly welcoming and friendly to someone so new to the scene.
Yeah, no, I mean, you have been keeping for like a weirdly short amount of time for the amount of success that you've had.
That is insane. I had no idea it's only been 4 years. But like the story you were saying, I was like, solid 10 years.
Nowhere near.
But I feel like you've already like had so many trials and experiments.
Scrub years
and, like, all that.
is like 3 years for a year. I think that
Scrub
if you kept ball
different.
pythons for 20 years, I don't think you have the experience of somebody who's kept scrubs probably for 5. But but I mean, is there have you seen backlash from the fact that you've been so successful in just a few years, or like, is it tough? Because I know it's hard in the herp community at all to be a beginner.
Are people jealous? That's what it sounds like.
Not really, but
that he did it so well.
But it is hard being a new keeper and then coming into a group of like veteran keepers. You need to kind of scoot your way in there.
In general, like, I've received nothing but support. And like, while there have been sort of like misinterpretations and like misunderstandings on both sides in certain cases, like, as far as I'm concerned, it's just like, let sleeping dogs lie. What's done is done. Like, okay, whatever your problems you have with me, like, whether it be like that I've had success or whatever, like, most of the time I think I've been lucky breeding these. I've just happened to like hit the point where like whatever I've done has worked. Do I know like if like I've got a couple more scrub pairings planned, and I'm just like, I'm treating them like they're my first one ever. I'm just like, I don't know if this is going to work. Everything's still tested. I'm not going to say, right, I've got 3 more pairs, I'm going to get 3 more clutches. It's sort of very much, if I get a clutch, I've done something right, but I'm still trying to work out what that thing is, because like, from what I've seen, there's not just one way of breeding a scrub where you have to do strict temp drops and halting of feeding and strict and like very strict introductions of when the male goes in or whatever. Like it's just for me, it's just like, as I said, let the animals do what they want to do.
Yeah, I think it's such a different mentality because we're used to, especially because mostly what we breed is corn snakes, and it's like you breed a corn snake just a few times, then you know how to breed corn snakes, and then you're real chill and relaxed about the whole process. But I mean, it seems like you keep focus throughout the whole time because like it's never a given that you're gonna get a clutch.
No, like I mean, with scrubs, like especially with the experiences I've had already, I'm just like nothing is ever for certain with these animals. Like even now, like I've seen whatever 2 or 3 python ovulations where I've like gone back through the dates after they've laid and said, right, that is what I think is the ovulation. But even now, like having seen what I think was the ovulation with mahogany, I'm still like, I'm not 100% sure. Like, I still even have doubts. Like, I think she's had her pre-lay shed. Whether, like, I won't say she'll definitely have a clutch, but when you work with the animals for so long, you get a feeling, and like behavioral changes are a big thing that I pick up on. Like, she's never used the nest box before, but the day after what I thought was the ovulation, she was in the nest box. So I was just like, she had access to that for 6 months beforehand. Never used the hide, never used the nest, like, never went in there apart from maybe sticking her head in for about 10 seconds to sort of like scope it out and then just moved off. So that's mainly what I'm relying on is sort of like I see a behavioral change. I'm like, right, I compare that to my experiences from before and go, I think that was an ovulation. Like I'm not nowhere near experienced enough to say, yeah, definitely an ovulation. I'm definitely get a clutch. Like end of November could come and she may not lay eggs, and then I'll just be like, well, okay, I got this one wrong. Like I misread these signs.
Now, I mean, some species it looks like they swallowed a football, and you're like, okay, yeah, that girl ovulated. Are scrubs like that, or is it a little bit harder to tell?
From what I've seen now, and I think like when you know what you're looking for, it's obvious. When you're new, when you're like completely new to scrub python breeding, like I sort of thought before follicle development, I thought maybe that had been the ovulation. In the scrubs where like the females had passed, I thought like, oh, had they ovulated? But like from the post-mortem, I found like no, that was just follicle building. So I was like, okay, well I knew I hadn't seen an ovulation then. But then with the oxybles breeding, there was one night where I went in there and the female was just cruising around, and she just like there was just a certain part of her just like literally going along just bulged, sort of like and sort of time and a half what she was usually. And at that point, I was like, I think that's the ovulation. So like took pictures, took a video, wrote down the date, wrote down the time, and wrote down like what she was doing. Was she staying still? Was she cruising? Like sort of what behavior was she showing? So that, and then after I got the clutch, I went back through sort of the timeline of what everybody had said, and I was like, right, that was the ovulation there, so I could like use that picture as reference for future. So like the next time the Nauta ovulated, I was like, okay, I'm more confident in saying this is an ovulation. And with Mahogany now, like I'm sort of like 90% confident of saying that was definitely an ovulation. Just not even the fact that she was big, but when you're dealing with scrubs, like they're curled up, sometimes even they're just curled up normally, you see scale separation and you're like, oh, okay, like is she gravid? It's like, no, okay. But then just combining that with behavioral things of general restlessness, like moving between basking and being cool every sort of like hour and a half, just like constantly shifting position, and just a general sort of restlessness, like she didn't stop cruising around the cage while she was ovulating. She sort of stayed basking for a little bit, moved around, went down cool, then moved back up, and then was just generally sort of like slowly moving around the whole enclosure. So that's what I sort of go on. I don't take snakes out to palpate. It's just like for me, it's what is the behavior indicating is what helps me sort of say, right, I think that one is gravid.
Right. And do you think if you did, I mean, if you were taking a female out all the time to palpate them, or, I mean, you think that would ruin the whole process?
I
Or at
don't
least,
think. I'm not even sure if it would sort of hinder it, because I know a lot of like the way more experienced guys like Dan Malarian, that like they pull females and palpate them all the time, and they've like still have had breeding success. For me, it's just like similar to not having seen an ovulation before with palpating them. I haven't had to learn a species. Like I haven't had a species that's easy to breed. That's just like I can learn on this species. It's like I'm starting from.
I can't feel shit. People act like you can feel shit. I can't feel anything on any species that I've bred. I don't feel it. I don't know what you guys are talking about. They're like, oh, it's a string of pearls down there. I'm like, get the fuck out of here, dude. It feels like a snake. I don't know. So I wouldn't know.
Yeah, so for me, it's just like I can't palpate. So, and from what I've seen, there's no real reason for me to palpate the way that I do the breedings of just like leaving the snakes to do their thing. So for me, it's just something extra that I don't need to do. For me, it's like I'm not hugely like if a scrub doesn't breed or a snake doesn't breed 1 year, it's not like a major thing. I'm not sort of like relying on getting multiple clutches. It's like, okay, I need to work out something better for that next year then to get this clutch. It's not like just money focused of I need another clutch. It's just like if I breed them, if and when it's going to happen, it'll happen. So I like with other species, I've had the thing of I haven't put as much time into the breeding aspect as the scrubs. So like, will I be able to do it? Like for the water pythons, I got lucky. For the Papuan carpets, I got lucky. Like they were just like semi long term cohabiting pairs, no external manipulation. They just did their own thing in the enclosures, and I ended up with a clutch. So for me, that was just like those were all pure luck. Like nothing I did to them would signal, apart from just keeping them, would signal that like I was trying to breed them.
And oh man, I had a question off that, but I forgot. But there's a good question.
There's a question from the chat. Frank Tatis. No idea. Frank wanted to know about your record keeping. He said it seems like you take a lot of notes on behaviors. Are you consistent with that amount of record keeping?
In general, like for me, I would know that like overall I'm not as consistent as I would be on other species as I would be for the scrubs, and it's something that I'm like trying to address, is to have the same attention to detail to all the species and not just rely on sort of like luck or anything. As far as record keeping goes, as far as feeding, apart from neonates, I don't keep feeding records. I judge by eye of what the animal is looking like. If I think, okay, they're a bit thinner, I'll give them slightly more regular feeds. But in general, I'm sort of like, I'm just going as a I sort of call it like a semi-natural diet. It isn't 2 or 3 big meals a year. It's sort of like maybe 6 or 8 for an adult scrub, like 6 or 8 meals a year is what I would average for them.
Okay, so like, kind of more just observing.
Yeah, it's just mainly like observing, and like a lot of it is done like just if I see something, I'll make a post on Facebook about it, just like as a little note, just like if I have my phone, take a picture, make a quick post, and then I can go back through, find that post, and then like write that further down into the other notes I've taken, and I can be like, right, well, this fits in with this timeline of this happening there. So like,
so
yeah, as far as
how has that helped you as far as like your observations and adjustments that you've made?
To me, it's just like, for me, the observation part of it really comes into its own when it's breeding season. Like just seeing a female drastically change her behavior is, for me, is a bigger indicator than like the time of year, or like does she look big or whatever. It's just like pay attention to the behavior of what the animal is doing. Like this animal hasn't been to a certain place in the cage at all. She suddenly goes down into the nest. Why is this? It's like, why is she suddenly seeking somewhere that's a lot more secure and is darker and smaller than before? So for me, like the observations do help, like taking a picture or a video, even if it's just on my phone and it's a quick one of something that I think is important. Like just I see a behavior or something, I take a picture or video of it just for my own sort of like interest as much as sharing. And I think for this, it just like it's definitely helped with building enclosures where you're sort of like you're trying to like each enclosure we built, we've moved on from very basic, sort of like more basic enclosures to now being more elaborate with like horizontal branches that cut, or vertical branches which come out with horizontal branches to them as well. So it's sort of like the behavioral things, like I know, okay, scrubs tend to like using this sort of perch configuration, or they like this species seems to utilize shelves more. This one seems to like sort of like branches with a Y in it that they can push up against. So it's just sort of like learning seeing what the animals are telling you that they sort of like want or they prefer, and then just applying that to the other animals that you have, and sort of like, right, well, I'll try this for more of them if that works.
Now, bringing it back to kind of what we talked about before, kind of the making them feel secure and not messing with them too much. How often do you change things around? Like, do you feel that when you change the decor around that affects the animal, and is it ever in a negative way? And what could affect the animal in a negative way if I don't know what you can do to do that, but
I mean, for me in general, if I have like, I wouldn't just like change an enclosure for the sake of it, just like unless I'm changing it dramatically because of what I've seen the animal do, I'm not just going to change it for the sake of it. Like, I'll often just add small things like cuttings from the like Tradescantia from the bioactives, just like throw them into odd cages as a bit of like enrichment, or like I'll sometimes take a shed from a female and put it into a male's enclosure and just mist it slightly. It's like, it's just sort of like you can see like some of the scrubs, and like especially some of the carpets and that, like when you put in shed from another animal, like within a couple of minutes they're down and their tongue flicking all the way along it. It's sort of like, it's a thing of enrichment. Like they're going to encounter other snake sheds in the wild. It's like something that may contribute. Like I know some people say put a male shed into a male, put another male shed into a male snake, and it'll sort of like help him spur him on, because he'll sort of be thinking, oh, there's another male, I need to mate with the female, so it will get him more into a breeding mode. I haven't seen a particular sort of like increase in anything by doing this, but I think it's something that's very simple to do, and it adds another layer to your keeping. It's something else. Like the snakes can come. They're sort of like using their brains. They're like finding out what this scent is. Where did it come from? Picking up information from it. So I think it's something that just like doesn't hurt, but I wouldn't ever just completely rearrange an enclosure that I know has worked before, or is like the animal feels like, if I'm happy with how that animal is behaving in that enclosure, I won't change it up unless I think something has changed for that animal.
And do you introduce males to males for combating? I mean, I don't know if it's prevalent in scrubs, obviously in carpets, but in either of those, do you do that?
No, we haven't done that. The main reason being is like when I was researching scrubs, and I got the Keeping and Breeding Australian Pythons book, and they said, like, noted with us, especially Australian scrubs, like a lot larger, that males in combat can expose underlying musculature. Like they will bite and they will lacerate during combat. So it's something, for me, it's not worth the risk. I haven't needed to do it, so I mean, using the shed is as good as anything. If you're going to do anything, like use a fresh sample of shed, or just like get a shed and like mix it up. And one of my friends who I got some Madagascan ground bows off, like he told me that trick. And he sort of said, like, yeah, often just like he was like, just throw in a male shed. Like, and so for scrubs and carpets, I wouldn't like just put two males in to try and get them into breeding mode. I think it's too much of a risk on the animal to worry about, especially with scrubs. Like scrubs can turn and do so much damage so quickly. Like I've been bitten by them, I know what they can do. So risking that being inflicted on another animal is just not worth. It wouldn't be even worth getting a clutch to it. It's like if this animal get injured and then I get a clutch, the clutch isn't worth that other animal possibly being injured for me. It's just like, no, if I'm gonna do it, it's gotta be the best for everyone involved, like for me and the reptiles.
Yeah. Now, but do you think is there a spurring of like the male kind of competitiveness as far as putting the shed in there? Will you do that before putting them with a female, or
I have
in that particular situation?
I have done that, and I have put sort of like a mixture of male and female sheds in there, so there's sort of a mixture of scents coming through. I can't I know that the snakes will often go down, and they know that something else is there. They'll go down and they'll systematically move along where I've spread the shed in that enclosure, and they'll move through and they'll sniff each different piece of it, like they'll tongue flick each different piece of it. As far as it being something that's consistent, I wouldn't be able to, like, as far as I can see, it doesn't seem to help. But in my opinion, it can't hurt. So why not try it? Like, why not do it? It can't hurt. You're not gonna. No harm is gonna come of throwing a couple of bits of shed in there and spraying it down. So that's sort of, there are possible benefits. You might as well do that.
I wonder, because people often say, obviously, don't cohabitate animals because they're going to stress each other out, which, I mean, our last few guests have been people who cohabitated animals, so it's kind of funny. But, I mean, do you think the stress is coming from the humans, or do you think because obviously you're exposing your snakes, at least to their other snake scents, so, and they're scrubs who are going to be very sensitive.
So, like, I mean, I don't think that, like, for as far as stress goes in cohabiting, and like, I've seen a lot of it recently, like a lot of people getting berated online for cohabiting, and interestingly, I haven't really had any, even though I've posted in places where people are generally completely anti-cohabbing. I've only ever once, I think, had someone who was so just like had their mind set in stone about the horrors of cohabiting that are like, even with a logical sort of like discussion, you couldn't sort of change their mind or even get them to try and change their mind. And I don't cohabit everything, and I don't cohabit, and like every cohabited pair is selected. It's like, okay, for whatever reason, it being like for the Sarongs, I had the choice of having the female in a 6x2x3 and breeding her in that, so an 11-foot and a 13-foot snake in a 6x2x3, or having them cohabit in a 8x2.5x4 foot viv. So I chose to go for the cohabiting route, but I pay close attention to them. So if the female looks like she is stressing out, if she's staying somewhere very cool and she isn't moving out of sort of a very dark corner, then I'll say, right, no, I can't cohabit with these. Like, I can't. They're not suitable. So it is very much knowing which animals you're going to do it with, paying attention to their behaviors once they're in there together. And scrubs will often be a bit jumpy around one another initially in introductions, but that goes from introductions from breeding or just simply putting them into cohabbing. They can be quite jumpy for the first sort of like day until they've sort of like gotten used to the fact there's another animal in there. And in general, they just seem to just like completely like relax and calm out. They like, one doesn't compete for basking points, but if you're going to cohab, you're going to have to think about, okay, like as you said, I have multiple options for basking, multiple options for staying cool. So it is a case of just like think about how you're going to do it if you are going to cohab. And people say, oh, you've got crossing of diseases. If one gets sick, the other one's going to get sick. Well, like, you're going to run that risk when you breed anyway. If you put two animals that have been raised separately together, one of them could have a bacteria internally which they can live with in the host animal, but if that bacteria gets into the other pair, then it's not going to, like, that is going to cause an issue anyway. So even just by mating two separate animals, you could run into this problem of one carrying a bacteria that isn't useful for, or like isn't the other snake doesn't have a immunity to, and so you're going to still risk that animal getting sick no matter what you do. And feeding is just a case of, you just have to be aware. You take the precautions. I don't think we've ever had one where there's been a feeding response bite after or while we've been feeding. Like even reintroducing, we haven't had anything bite bite the other one. Like we'll often remove, if it's a pair, we'll remove the male because they seem less prone to stress. We'll never remove a female. The males, you seem to have a lot more. I mean, people are removing them every couple of days during introductions. I mean, what's the harm going to be of the stress level of removing it once every 4 to 6 or 8 weeks for feeding, just for 2 or 3 days in a large tub, let them digest, back in, spray the enclosure down. It's working for me, and I'd say and I'm not saying like everybody should cohabit and it'll be some magical thing that everybody will suddenly be breeding all these rare pythons if they cohabit. It's like, if it works for you, do it. Like, don't necessarily listen to everybody saying, oh, how much it's a bad idea. Like, if you're confident that you know the animals and you're going to pay attention and you can provide an enclosure that's large enough, it's not a space saving thing. It's like, if you can provide an enclosure large enough for those 2 snakes with enough options, cohabit. It's like, cohabit if you want to. Just pay attention to what those animals are telling you.
I think that there's a fine line between what you just explained and people who would cohabitate in the enclosure that they would normally
Just put one
animal
in. That's the biggest difference, I think.
That's the main issue. Is like, okay, I could have gone for like the sarongs 2 6x2x3s, but okay, I went for an 8x2.5x4 foot. So it's like the enclosure is so much larger. They have multiple options to bask. It's not a thing of, okay, I've got a 4x2x2. I'm going to keep 2 pythons in that, which one of them should have that enclosure. Like, they should have that enclosure each.
Sorry, I just tried to talk into the mic and my mic went out before.
No, your mic didn't go out. You turned it off and you forgot to turn it back on.
Turn my mic back on.
So I don't know if they heard you, but whatever. Okay, so my question is, since scrubs are such of your main focus, are you going to expand the other projects, like with your waters and your carpets? Are you going to continue to breed them, or are you going to expand them?
We're gonna continue breeding them. Like, we've kept like one of the water pythons as a whole back. Carpet pythons, like, I'm not entirely sure if we're gonna keep going. I mean, money isn't an issue, like, as for like, I don't care what I necessarily get for the animals, but you're looking at something like carpets which are regularly produced and they're demanding sort of like, I know of someone who I know has 20 pure bredal carpets for sale, and he's selling them at 20 sterling. So I don't know what that is, like maybe
what the fuck is a sterling, dude?
I've never heard
pounds,
of a sterling.
pounds, British pounds. So I think that's like 20. I think that might be something around like $15. I'm not sure.
Wow.
Like baby bredals, pure bredals for 15 quid, and he can't sell them. So there is a thing of like, you have to think, well, I'm gonna have this many babies of these. Now for us, like, we have the guy who runs the shop who like sort of helped me get started, has said like, if you have surplus, they'll quite happily take them. And he said they'll quite happily like take them at wholesale. So as far as like having offspring left over, I'm not too concerned. But you do have to think like, why am I breeding these? It's like, the market's oversaturated. Does it need another 20, 30 carpets? Does it need another 20, 30 retics? So you need another 20, 30 ball pythons from a clutch to just get one animal that you hope to get out. Is like, overall, does the hobby need these excess animals? But for stuff like the water pythons and the sort of the more obscure species that not many people would sort of like know about or see that often, we want to keep up sort of like a broad thing. Like, we want to breed the cyanias, the green cat-eyed snakes. We want to breed the mangrove snakes. We want to breed the Goniosoma jansseni. So we don't just want to sort of be a one-trick pony of this is all we do. It's sort of like, we hope to be able to breed sort of like multiple different species, multiple different genuses, and just sort of like, because I think like, even though each species is different, like, you can take certain things from each species that you learn and apply them to others. Be it behavioral differences, you can still sort of transfer that over to to an animal. Like they all stay cool the same when they're follicle building. They start to bask when they ovulate. So like you can it does cross over for the species. So yeah, we do hope to. We're going to carry on breeding sort of the more
Rare.
sort of like uncommonly seen stuff. Just for the fact that like we're not just set in stone on scrubs. We like having that diversity about the collection. Like it's something nice about being able to go work with colubrids when you want to go and work with colubrids, and then work with pythons. Like I love carpet pythons because they're just easier to work with slightly smaller versions of scrubs. It's like I can go to the Morelia, I can take them out with my bare hands. I don't get bitten. I tried to do that with the scrubs. I know that I'm gonna end up bandaging half of my arm.
Well, you also have Boiga, which are kind of like little arboreal assassins also. So
Little arboreal assassins.
they're just like slightly smaller versions of what you already have. So, I mean, do you like, or what kind of got you into the Boiga?
The mangroves, like they were just one of the sort of iconic species that you would see on nature documentaries, and we saw them at one show in the UK that like some vendor had, and they looked a bit ropey, and I was just like, a friend of mine at the time had the adult pair we had now, and I was saying like wait till she breeds them because they're like her snakes are stunning, like just wait till she breeds them. And she ended up selling, and she offered them to us. So that's where we sort of got that, and then we got the male cyanea with the two mangroves as well, and we actually bought the water pythons from the same girl.
Now, are you keeping those animals in a different room, a little bit cooler than your pythons, or how are you keeping the Boiga?
Yeah, we keep the Boiga in a different room, which we can let get a little bit cooler than the python room. So we have the two mangroves in 4x2x2s at the minute. We plan on upgrading the female to a 4x2x4 purely for her to have, and then keep the male in a 4x2x2 as he's slightly smaller. But the idea behind the bigger enclosure is to sort of like for when we try to breed them, is like there's a lot more room, like especially with them being what they are. Like there have been instances of cannibalism, it's well known. Like give them that little bit of extra space and try and cut down on that risk.
So you're basically giving the male room to run away from the female?
Yeah, if he needs to.
So, and how have you gone introducing them? Have you had success? What have you seen so far? And how long have you had them? I'm not even sure how long you've had them.
We've had them for similar time periods, sort of about 3 years, and I think the female is now 4 years old. I think she is now 4 or 5. We tried breeding before because, like, when we first initially kept them, we were told keep them in small things. So we had them in like 2x3s, I think it was, that we were keeping them in. And then we decided, like, we upgraded them and they were only drop feeding. We upgraded them into the 4x2x2s, and they both started strike feeding immediately in the larger enclosures. They were way more active at night. As far as we haven't had any success, I mean, I've tried doing introductions once or twice, and it's the one thing that like comes back to I've put so much. I know how much work I put into the scrubs and learning how to, or finding out the information on breeding them. But with the other species, I know that I'm lacking behind in certain areas to the point where I would want to be to do breeding and like hope to do a breeding properly. So that's something I'm sort of working on addressing. It's like having rather than being well versed in one species and then letting everything sort of be if it happens for the others, is being a lot more, is having the same level of like dedication to the scrubs as I do to the other species as well. So yeah, the female we found each time we moved her from the enclosure. When we moved her both times, like as we were upgrading, we found 2 like clutches of about 8 slugs, 8 infertile eggs. So we're hoping for this season that she's ready. She's a good 6.5, 7 foot long. Like she's a nice sized snake. So we're hoping that this season we'll have some success with them, with the green cat eyes as well.
Yeah.
I had some questions from the chat I was going to ask. Did you have another one?
No.
Okay, so our friend Brandon asked how it was getting your waters started.
Getting the water python started for feeding.
Yes.
Not too bad. I mean, most of them, they started off like the thing with baby liasis is like just with the water pythons, they're so angry that like whatever approaches is just I'm gonna just like continually biting at it, not biting it. Getting them started feeding, quail scenting was the biggest factor. Like they did drop feed occasionally on unscented mouse fluffs. As soon as I scented them with quail, they started just like stripe feeding them immediately. So whatever it was, the quail was definitely the way to go, or seemed to be the way to go for the liasis for us.
Do you see something similar with the scrubs?
From my experience with the scrubs, basically unscented, defrosted, they're fine with like the Nautas started feeding well, the Highlands did start feeding well, like purely on unscented. I think there was about 3 or 4 of the 9 needed to be started on chick scented. But in general, I found the carpets and the scrubs just like unscented mice. The key is to make sure that you heat them up. Like you make sure that they are hot. Don't just like pick them up straight off whatever you're defrosting them in. Like if you're just defrosting them on a tray, make sure you either like pick them up in a piece of tissue, just like hold them in your hand, get them hot, so like they're actually something to aim for them. And that seems to be the biggest thing. Like quite a lot of the neonates now will not strike as eagerly if the food is just sort of like room temp. As soon as I heat it up another bit more, they're immediately just like bang, the feeding response is there. That heat signature seems to be a big key of getting them past that initial stage.
Do you have a hard time finding quail and chicks?
No, well, we do now because the supplier from up north that we had is now shutting down. They're stopping sending out stuff, so we've just like put in one last big order, which should see us through for the next sort of like 6 months to a year easily. So we have to source somewhere else that is willing to either send them to us, and all failing that, we're going to have to be looking at sort of like setting up our own colonies for some stuff. But in general, like these guys were brilliant. Like quail, multi-mammoths, gerbils, hamsters, guinea pigs, rabbits, whatever you needed. Like even adult quail or like sub-adult quail, they could get. And it was just like as you needed them, a bag of 50, and it was really easy just to get a whole load of different prey items from them. So it was a big hit finding out that they were going out of business.
That's nice. It's such a variety.
But I don't think people realize, especially when they first get into snake keeping, that like one of the biggest factors is the availability of food.
Yeah.
Whether it's diversity or just finding a small rat at a certain part of the year.
Yeah, like I mean, when you get to a certain like number of snakes, it's like buying a couple of dozen from the shop locally doesn't work anymore. You have to like just bulk buy. And it's one thing I think like the variety of feeding is something that's overlooked by a lot of people. It's like they think if they feed something else, the snake's going to get stuck on that. I haven't had this myself. I haven't had one snake where I like feed it hamsters and it will only take hamsters after that. I've never had that myself, but I know it happens. I've just been lucky so far. But I think there is the feeding the variety is something that people overlook as something is like if it like they say for us a varied diet is the best, like little bit of everything. Like same thing for snakes in my opinion. Like different prey is going to have different mineral levels. It's going to have different like macro and micronutrients in it. So as far as I'm concerned, that is another big part of keeping, which I think is overlooked, is this willingness to try different prey items. To get like I've only ever had to assist feed one neonate that I've hatched so far, because I've just been trying every mad scent that I could think of. I mean, like I was told, tin tuna, tin salmon, like mackerel heads from like get a mackerel, just like scent the pinky with mackerel. And these guys, like I know one guy who uses like tadpoles or frog scenting to get some of his stuff onto food, and it's just like if you can, you've got to exhaust all of those options if you can get the prey before you decide to move on to assist feeding, especially something like green trees or scrubs. Like, they're very prone to stress. It's not something that you want to do willingly, is like start restraining it and like pushing the prey up to its mouth. Like, if you can get them going naturally by using a variety of scents, I think it's a better way to go.
I'm sorry, totally different topic. I just looked it up and it's 39 degrees there. How are you not freezing right now?
Oh, it's okay. Like, it's a little bit cold, but I've gotten used to it.
What? I'd be shivering out there right now.
Yeah, but
Okay.
when you live here for 17 years, you do get used to it.
I was thinking today, like, oh man, this is the perfect weather, and it's like probably the perfect. It's like the same weather as you guys have there
No,
now.
today was nice. Today it got up to 61.
Yeah, but it was like I went to the gym this morning. It was like 50 degrees, and I
It
was
was
like,
nice.
oh, I
It
want
was
this
nice.
to be like this.
Yeah, but
every
that's
day.
not 39 sitting outside in a light jacket.
No, I know.
Oh,
it's
no,
Irish
this
people.
This is
He's not Irish,
isn't
but
a light jacket. This is a dressing gown and a hoodie and a t-shirt underneath. So it's not.
Okay.
No, I do the layers. I do have layers.
Okay. Okay.
But I think as far as feeding goes, like especially because we have hognose snakes, which like would probably not feed on rodents at all in the wild. Obviously, they want to eat your toads and stuff like that, but we somehow tricked them into eating mice their whole life. And same with, we had a guy out with water snakes like a couple weeks ago, and he actually always feeds hairless rats and stuff like that to his animals because they can't digest the hair. So it's like, I mean, at some point, I mean, obviously you're always trying to get them onto rodents, but things like Boiga obviously feed on lizards and stuff a lot, especially in captivity. Like, is there merit to feeding it like what it's supposed to actually feed on?
I think there is. I mean, with the Boiga, we have a sort of we would feed them more regularly than we would the python species in general, but I am very aware of sort of like how much I feed them and keeping an eye to make sure that, like, especially for the Boiga, they're not losing that triangular shape. Like, if the female or the male starts in any way to look sort of rounded, I immediately like drop back on the food. Mainly for them, I feed day old quail. I mean, it hasn't seemed to make them. I know people say quail have a higher, or day-old chicks. Sorry, I know people say it. Like, people say the chicks have a higher fat content. It hasn't seemed to affect them. They do not sort of like look obese, and like it's one thing that you're sort of very aware of. I mean, we can't get sort of like, we do have frogs legs and that, and I'm sort of, the issue I have with feeding parts of prey is like feeding chicken wings or chicken necks. As okay, yes, it's variety, but you're literally just giving like the protein and the bone. You're just giving muscle and the bone. There's nothing else there, which is my one issue, is just sort of feeding like just frogs legs to the Boiga, because apart from the fact if they do get stuck on them, it's a pain to get them and to get them continually. But I think it's a case of, with Boiga, I think like they're quite arboreal from like the images I've seen, and I do think that birds would make up quite a large. I would think, like, without having looked into it a lot, that birds are going to make up a reasonable part of their diet. Like, they're up high, they're up through the mangrove trees. There's going to be nests. They're going to take eggs. Like, I know Danny Stark offered one of his mangroves a sort of a chicken egg, and it took it no problem, just like left a chicken egg in the enclosure and just went ahead and ate it. So I think there is more things to try that people sort of like need to be aware of. Like, I fed the water pythons bait fish, like just frozen fish that you get in a fishing shop, and they seem to go mad for them. I mean, they'll just like trim the fins off. They do eat fish occasionally. So it's just to like try mixing it up with whatever you can think that the animal might be able to eat and see what works for you.
I may try fish with the water python. Like, what kind of fish are we talking?
I can't think. I can't think exactly what it is. Like we just went into sort of like the bait fish, and we were sort of getting sort of. I'm not sure if they were. What were they? I can't think of it off the top of my head, but just sort of any reasonable size sort of bait fish that anglers use, and I just trim the fins off them, so if they do eat it the wrong way, the fins aren't like poking out into them.
Oh, so is one of those like fish species with the needly, I don't know if that's a word, fins on it. So
Yeah,
you have
sort
to.
of. Yeah, they're a bit sort of spiky, but nothing that's. I wouldn't think it would hurt, but just as a precaution, it's like I always err on the side of safety. Like just a little bit paranoid. Like I cut chicks or I cut claws and beaks off all the chicks and the quails.
Really?
Yeah, it's just like because I've had a friend who had a false water cobra that was fed a chick, and the beak ended up just like cutting part of the internal and causing part of the internals of it and caused it to die. So I'm just like extra cautious with stuff like that.
Wow. I bet your house smells real great.
Oh, everything gets prepared outside.
Okay.
So it's like, right, everything gets defrosted and prepared outside. It's like, right, we'll do all of that, and then it's just in and feed everything as quickly as you can.
So your neighbors are walking by and see you just cutting beaks
It
off
seems
of
like
chicks?
you live in a pretty rural area. Do you even have neighbors?
Yeah,
or?
we have one neighbor.
Oh.
There you go, that's easy.
We have one house next to us. That's like the funniest one. Was explaining to the delivery driver like why we get so annoyed if he didn't turn up on that day, like because they'd ring you and say, look, I don't want to drive out to where you live because it's in the middle of the country. Can you come to like the town that's half an hour's drive away and pick up the stuff from there? Or like the phone signal isn't even that good, so sometimes you don't get the phone call. So he's there, and you're like, no, look, we told you if you get that package, like you have to deliver it to us. And he was like, well, what's in it then? What's in there then? And he was like, and we were like, do you really want to know? He was like, yeah, what's in it?
A snake.
It's like frozen rats. Look, so why do you need frozen rats? Oh, to feed like the collection of 100 snakes that are in there. And he's just like, right. I was wondering what you were doing with all these like things that said frozen food. And sort of like just completely goes like nothing out of the ordinary. It's like, oh, do you want to come and see them? No, you're fine. I'm not. No, I don't need to go and see them.
Wow, we would never have that long of a conversation with the FedEx driver. You would have like cursed him out by that point.
Yeah, those are people who do not have conversations with you.
Yeah,
Everything's a little bit sort of everything's a lot slower in Ireland. It's everything just moves a little bit slower. Like everybody's got the time to stop and have a chat, especially in the rural parts. It's just like, yeah, we'll stop, we'll have a chat, like pull up on the road, like single lane road, we'll pull up 2 cars, wind the window down, have a conversation. There's someone pulled up behind us, we'll carry on having the conversation
oh my
for
gosh.
another like 5 minutes, and then we'll move off. It's just like everything is just like, and nobody beeps, no one's swearing, nothing. Everything's just a lot easier to live here. It's a lot friendlier country.
That doesn't sound bad.
But if my delivery driver is like, can you come
But my
to
delivery
this
driver
town?
better be on fucking time.
I mean, it better
right?
get to like, no, I'm not going to drive to you. Your job is to deliver it to me. Like, are you crazy? The fact that he even like,
yeah, we don't
that
stand for stuff like that.
Yeah, no.
We're very timely.
No, we just don't answer the phone anymore, so that they have to come up to the house. We're just like, nah. If we just pretend we haven't got the phone call, they'll come up to the house anyway.
That's funny.
Now, obviously, you have a collection of over 100 animals. It seems like. Where do you plan on going with this? Like, is this a business? Also, you mentioned you're in school. Like, what are you in school for? What's the goal of all this?
Well, currently I'm currently out of school. I'm unemployed and looking for work. Initially I studied general science at Trinity in Dublin and did sort of 2 years general science, specialized in geology. Came out, decided photography was something that I wanted to try and work on and make a break. So at the minute I'm trying to sort of like build myself up as a photographer over here as well. So it's quite difficult, as like it is everywhere. Everybody can go and buy a camera and like you're a photographer, and like things on Facebook have buy all these photographers' professional filters and whatever he uses for $250, and your photos will look magic all of a sudden. So, but like I've gone through and like gone to a proper photography course and like trying to do it the old way, sort of like hard, like grafting away. So hopefully that is somewhere. I mean, as far as the snake breeding is concerned, I'll never I don't think we'll ever be a point where we're a business, like a business you're making money at it. And at the minute, like we make a good amount to sort of say like, right, well, that's like paid for all the frozen and all the hardware and all the like substrate and lights and stuff. But as far as making a profit at the minute, it's not going to happen. And even then, like I won't be really breeding females 2 years in a row unless it's like a certain species, like the water pythons. I think are documented having had like successive clutches over like successive years, like without a break. So for species like that, I may decide, right, I'll try her again this year. But as far as the scrubs are concerned, it's going to be a minimum of sort of like a year break between each clutch with them, because I mean their incubation time naturally is so long, and even if I take the eggs off them, I still think it's better to give that female the time to recover. Like it is a stressful experience for them, and I think it's important to sort of take a step back and say, well, why am I keeping these animals? Is it to make money? Is it for the animals themselves? Like, why are you keeping? It's a question we all have to ask. And yes, money is a part of it, especially when you're dealing with a large collection. Money does come in, like the cost of feeding, cost of electricity. You need to sort of have some income back in, but at the same time, I don't think it should be solely concentrated on how much money I'm going to get out of this. I mean, ideally, yeah, I'd love to make it as sort of like a full-time job where I was able to breed snakes as my sole source of income. I don't think it'll happen. I think I'll just sort of be sort of like a keen amateur of just like I'm an amateur breeder. It's like I'm getting clutches fairly regularly, but nothing you can sort of say I'll have 10 or 15 clutches every year. It's all sort of at this point in time, it's all very much feeling as we go along, like, okay, we might get a clutch this one I think is ready to breed, so we'll try her. Nothing is ever rushed. Like if there's a choice between, is the female, like, is she just okay or leave her, we'll always go leave her another year, like give her that chance to mature. Like you're going to get a better clutch out of a 7-year-old female that's only like 9 foot, whereas compared to a 4-year-old female who's 15 foot, because she's been fed far more, you're probably going to get a better clutch out of the older, smaller animal.
I think where a lot of us fall is like, yeah, you don't want to say that you do it for the money, but you certainly want to produce enough because you have a giant rodent bill, right?
Yeah, like you have, money does come into it, but like I wouldn't like if someone asks like, why do you keep them? Is it for like, is it to make money? Is it to breed for the sake of breeding? It's just like, it's just to get the opportunity to work with these animals. It's, if I breed them, I breed them. If I don't, they're still just amazing to have as pets and to like observe and admire. So that's sort of where my standpoint is on it. But when you get to a collection the size we have, like money does come into it. You do have to look at, right, we need, you can't just like, we're not rich, we're not well off, we don't have like a couple of 100,000 sitting in the bank or whatever that we can just afford to keep on spending X hundred on rodents every couple of months. Like it is a thing of, well, we need to make sure that this is in at least some way, once the initial costs of enclosure setups, that it's somewhat, even if it gets to a point where it's self-sustaining or almost self-sustaining, I'd be happy with that point of just like an almost self-sustaining collection. I get the joy of working with the animals and they pay for themselves. If I make a profit or not, I'm not really concerned about it. It's not why I started keeping. I didn't start keeping to make money. I didn't start keeping to sort of like be an online presence or whatever. I started keeping because I wanted to work with the animals.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's breeding scrubs for money.
for the challenge. He likes the challenge.
And just the pure passion for an animal that doesn't like you.
Can tear you. That's weird to say. Okay, we've totally kept you past your time, but we had one last question from the chat that I was interested in too. Ryan asked, in Ireland, is there more excitement for alternative species and not the mainstream stuff, i.e. carpets, balls, corns, and blood pythons?
No, there isn't. There's a small handful of people, as I've said, like keeping, like there's a guy who has a really nice collection of sort of like carpets of Morelia, of green trees, of emeralds over here, who keeps very much off Facebook. There's a couple of guys, like there's one guy who works exclusively with Pituophis, and he has some fantastic animals. Like he recently bought 3 of the Santa Cruz Island, the dwarf Pituophis from us. That we managed to breed last year. He bought a trio of those from us as well. In general, it is very much still sort of playing catch up to the rest of the world. Like when I was started keeping, there were a couple of like other lads around the same age as me, a little bit older, a little bit younger, getting into ball pythons and ball python morphs. They're not keeping anymore, because they either got fed up, they lost a couple of animals and they took the hit and they sort of burnt out, or their interest changed. But in general, I'm now seeing there's a small bunch of like guys who are sort of like really good keepers, really keen, who are now getting to the point where they're just like, no, I'm going to work with these more obscure ones. I want to get scrubs. I want to get Timors. I want to get emeralds, I want to get green trees, sort of like go away from the mainstream. But in general, we're still very much stuck in the sort of like morph, ball python, beardy, retic phase sort of over here. But it is growing, and I'm seeing. I'm like personally, I mean, I'm seeing a change. I mean, like if I took deposits on like clutches, I'd be able to like I can sell. I basically know that when I get a clutch down of scrubs or liasis or something like that, I basically know like that clutch is sold as soon as it's laid. Like as soon as it's laid, the people who want the animals are just like they're waiting for me to breed them and going like we want to buy from you. We know their CB. We know how you keep them. And people are starting to sort of see, right, well, there's more advantages. There's something different. There's something to be said for keeping the different species. And I think it is slowly changing, that people are moving away from the mainstream species to go into more uncommonly kept species. And I know that I get like a lot of stick for saying rare or more unusual or uncommon. I'm not like, okay, morphs aren't my thing. I don't hate them.
That's usually a very snobby thing to say among some people. Some people take that as being
like
snobby.
some people take, if you say more uncommon species, as being snobby. It's like, no, I love snakes for snakes. Like I have different tastes than you. I don't particularly like morphs. Okay, some of them visually and like the work involved for getting some of the designer Morelias and the absolutely like stellar record keeping that these guys do for the like checking the lineage is like, that's something I hope to emulate with scrubs, is have like build a lineage of animals that like people can see this pairing was done to this pairing, but do it not as a designer, as a locality animal, but still have that sort of that family tree, that heritage of people being able to say, right, well, that offspring was from this pairing or was from that pairing. So like it's not a fact that like I hate morphs. I just don't. They're not for me. Like people who have morphs, locality pythons aren't for them. Some people keep both. I mean, like I've had my first royal was a pastel. Maybe you can call me a hypocrite. It's like just in general. I think like keep what you want to keep, and like okay, I'm saying more uncommonly bred species or kept species. They are like you post a picture of a water python, you'll get people asking like, what species is this, like, because they just haven't, in today's thing of like all the big names breeding the same 5-6 species, they don't get the opportunity to see like
they
people
are
who are
uncommon.
keeping, like they don't get people to see, they don't get the opportunity to see these species that people are keeping. And especially when a lot of people keeping the species that I do tend to keep very quiet and they tend to stay offline. So it's one thing I'm trying to do is sort of like highlight you don't need to keep the same species. Like, okay, water pythons, they may look like dull brown snakes, but I think they're one of the most beautiful pythons out there.
they're
Like
gorgeous.
just
Wait,
the
who
black
said
and the
they're
yellow
not
belly.
Well, yeah, because
They're-
people don't
they're
see them
not
in the
dull.
flesh. Yeah.
I think they're so iridescent and cool.
And the yellow belly is such a defining like
If
characteristic.
someone ever called my water python
well,
dull,
it's and I've
we would
had people over and like
issues.
you show them the olive and they're like, but it's like it has more of a ring to us because like we kind of know it's rare. and
No,
we
but
know
I'm
it's
still kind of on the olive.
Thanks.
Compared to the water, I'm sorry, the water is so much prettier than the olive. The olive, I'm just like, eh.
Well, okay.
It's a brown snake,
Jeez.
brownish green snake.
Well, do
But
you
he
have
loves
any
it.
interest in other liasis, or is it just water pythons for now?
Dunai, like the Duns. Duns is one that I would go. I've been tempted with olives, but the thing is, I mean, like olives and bolans and stuff like that, I've been tempted with, and like white-lip pythons as well, I've been tempted with, and I've been offered, and I've been to the point of I can get these, but then what happens if another breed a female for the scrubs come up? I'm not going to be able to get that, and it all goes back to the thing of like I have found the one species where I know that like this is where I really want to make a mark, and I want to breed sort of the other species as much as I can as well, like and get good captive populations. But it's more a fact of like I know that if push came to shove, I'd still keep scrubs at the end of the day if everything else left. Like I would still, I couldn't see myself in the future without at least a pair of scrub pythons, just because like they just, whatever it is about them, everybody has the one species that just means something is completely like a cut above the rest of them for them. So for me, it's scrubs. So I just know that like, yeah, I could get olives, but that space I could put a really sweet scrub python enclosure in there for breeding, and I'm just like, I'd prefer to do that. And like even just a case of getting to know more animals, it's a case of like I know that what I'm doing it isn't like easy. It isn't like to start off keeping and then 6 months be keeping scrubs and then a year and a half later of that having bred scrubs. It's like I know it's not an easy thing I want to do, and because I'm so focused on them, I feel that if I got other species which I really, really like, I feel I'd be doing an injustice to those species because I know that I'd still be just like, well, no, like scrubs are the main thing I'm focusing on. Like keeping them would just be saying, look what I've got. Like I have a pair of these, whereas I much prefer to say, I have another scrub python which works into this breeding group a lot better rather than just going, I have every species of python or I have every species of liasis or whatever. So, but that's just down to the individual taste.
Well, coming from a third party whose opinion doesn't mean anything, there's no one who is focusing on scrub pythons very intently and is producing them often. And then also, I mean, and you're very passionate about it. So like, just go deeper into that and be that guy. You might as well be that guy at this point, because if you aren't breeding them, who else is?
You aren't the guy. Who's
when
the guy?
Indo or Papua shuts down, then I mean, you're the only one with them with breeding. I mean, obviously there's others, but you know, they need someone with breeding colonies of these animals if they're not imported anymore.
It's like, yeah, like I think with scrubs, I mean, like we've got like a really, for the most part, we've got a really good community of scrub python keepers where everybody sort of pulls together for the most part. There's quite a lot of egos involved as well, and like I've been guilty of it as much as other people have, and I'll admit that. I can say, yeah, okay, I've gotten a little bit above myself there. I was speaking a little bit out of turn. But then also, I think, as you've said before, like people keeping one species for 20 years, and like, okay, you're keeping one species and you're breeding that species for 20 years. Does this mean you have more experience than me, than I have, who's been keeping for 4 years, but I've been keeping 15 or 20 different species and I've been breeding multiple species? It's like if we're looking at terms of like overall who has the more experience, I would argue like in that case I have the more experience over more species rather than just having concentrated on one species for most of my keeping career. But for scrubs, we've got a good it's a good community, and people do work together for the most part and do pull together. And I think that the problem is there are people who want to get into scrubs and they either don't realize quite what they're getting into or simply don't have the opportunity to house a large number. It's only like, I'm under no illusions, it's purely because I got into like the hobby with my father that I have been able to house this collection of scrubs as I currently do. If I wasn't in this position, I wouldn't be working with 90% of the animals, I'd say. Like, I know that I'm lucky in the position I am, so like I want to use that piece of luck that's gone my way. I want to use that to the best extent and sort of say, right, if I can establish a good European captive population of scrubs, and like that's my job done. Like if I can say I've had, I don't know, 8 or 9 successive breedings and like have multiple bloodlines and multiple pairings. So I'm not selling sibling pairs, I'm selling unrelated or like half sibling pairs. For me, that is more important than just saying I've bred scrubs X amount of times or I've kept them for this many years. Or like, for me, it's more about the animals themselves rather than what what reputation the animals give you. Like, it's my goal isn't for people to say, oh, he's like the best scrub keeper, or like he's bred scrubs more than anybody else. My goal is for people to say he helped set up captive scrubs as a sustainable population in Europe. It's not a thing of, I don't want to be known as like, oh, he's the scrub guy to go to. It's just like, no, it's like there are other guys out there. I'm just lucky to be able to be in the position where I'm working with a lot of individual animals and a lot of different localities. So I think other people given my position, other people would, bless you. I think other people given my position would do, and like given the breaks that I've had, would do just as well, if not better than I have. But just the fact that I was lucky to get into this and to sort of share that passion with my father, who sort of like backed me up and sort of was like, well, if you want to do this, like, you're going to put in the work, you're going to put in the research, you're going to help design, like you're going to design the cages for them. It's not just going to be sort of like some half-hearted thing. Like, it's going to be, if you're going to do it, you're going to do it properly.
Yeah. And I mean, you act like that's not going all out and the extra mile, and like you act like it's luck. But yeah, that's the whole thing of this reptile keeping. Like, there's so many people who jump in or like dip their toes in the water, and then 3 years later they're out. But then there's people who, you know, if you're gonna do it, like, you go all in and you do the best you can in every respect. But
it's 9:30. I mean, I even have more questions.
That's
I'm holding off on my question because it's 9:30.
Yeah, but that's a great way to end the show, I think. With
next time we'll talk about chondros,
carpondros,
carpets, and
hybrids. Not with me. You're not talking about them with me.
Yeah,
I want to know what his views on it is.
Oh, did someone ask? Oh no. Well, obviously you already got it.
But I was gonna. Okay. Well, might as well ask, like, what's your view on it?
Hybrids. It's a contentious subject. If they can potentially occur, or they do occur naturally in the wild, I'll say okay, fair enough with them. However, ball pythons crossed with Woma pythons, I'm just like, stop it. I'm just like, it just doesn't sit with me. And like, everybody has their own opinions, and I'm not going to say like, oh, I'm better because I don't think they should be kept pure. I just don't agree with it. It's like simple as they think it's a good idea, I think it's a bad idea. I just don't see why you'd want to do it personally. But
see, that's what I wanted to ask. That was such a great answer.
Some people do, and like, yeah, in the past I have been overly vocal about like tub keep it, like the connection between morph keeping and tub keeping. keeping and breeding morphs and tubs, and like minimum effort on the side of the keeper for enclosures, apart from providing clean water. But at this point, like I've grown up, matured a bit. Like that sort of part of it is in the past. It's not of interest to me of like getting into the politics of it. It's like, if you want to keep those, you do you. It's the same way I wouldn't expect someone to come up to me and say you should breed scrubs with green trees, because they know I don't agree with it. But in the same way, I shouldn't be saying, well, you shouldn't breed hybrids because I don't agree with it. That's just, everybody's different. If everybody was the same in the world, it would be boring, and it'd be no fun at all. So if you the only thing I would say is, and it's from what I've learned, is do what you want to do, and don't listen to other people saying, oh, you shouldn't do this, oh, you shouldn't do that. If you want to do it, fine. I don't agree with it. If you want to hybridize whatever snakes you want to, if you really want to do it, go ahead and do it. I would say ask yourself why you're doing it. Why would you cross two species which would not occur naturally together? Ask yourself, why are you doing it? Is it for the money? Is it for the reputation? Is it just because you're interested in what can happen? And if it's because you're interested scientifically in what species can interbreed, fine. But just make sure that if they are hybrids, they are represented accurately as hybrids. If you're going to be crossing a Boland's male with a carpet female, make sure that the people who are going to be buying those offspring know that the Boland's blood is, or the carpet's blood is tainted. It's not pure, with stuff like Boland's and scrubs. Keeping pure bloodlines and keeping these things well known, and full disclosure of what the animal you're selling is important for stuff like that, because there are people who do care about how the
Purity.
gene pool remaining pure. So it's just make sure that if you're going to do it, represent them as what they are. Don't try and pass them off as something they're not. So that's just my take on the matter. I wouldn't agree with hybrids personally, but I can see the interest in how they can interbreed.
Yeah, and I think it's one thing. I almost get more frustrated with animals that subspecies to each other, especially in carpets, or even a Brettles to a coastal, because then you can mistake it for something else. At least if you have
Exactly.
a ball woma thing, fucking,
It's pretty
that
obvious.
it's clear that shouldn't exist
Yeah.
in nature.
Yeah. I think and it's the same thing with the green tree pythons. Why people are designer green tree pythons, I understand. I understand people who've been working 10, 20 years on designer green tree projects. They're so far down the selective breeding line that they have a goal of where they want to be. But I think the people who are crossing single locality animals should be asking why. Why am I crossing this locality animal? Am I hoping that out of all odds, because me doing this one simple cross locality without having put 10 years of selective breeding work into it, I'm going to get some fantastic snake that's going to be completely different to any other green tree before? Chances are you're not, unless you're exceptionally lucky.
Right.
So why are you doing just a single cross? If the people have been working on them for multiple generations, yes, that is an art of itself, of knowing which lines to breed to create a certain desired trait. That is an art in itself. However, pairing an arrow to a Biac just for the sake of it, I don't personally see the benefits of this. I wouldn't see the benefits of just simple crosses the same way I don't see the benefits of crosses for scrub localities or for the subspecies of Morelia. I just don't see the point of why they should be crossed.
Yeah, I think with intent is an important part, because some people just throw them together because that's what they have, especially something like green trees. This female's ready to go, this one wasn't, so fuck it, I'm just going to put this male locality with this female or something like that.
But that's where I think patience is something that that scrubs have taught me, you can't. They're not a quick game. They're not a plug and play species you can stick together and breed. Like, you have to pay attention. You have to work with them. And I think patience is something that a lot of people in the hobby are sort of lacking. Like, I'd wait an extra year, even 2 years, for a female to breed rather than risk breeding her too early, or just like say, well, she's ready and this male from another locality is ready, so I'm just going to cross them just to breed them. It's like, well, I know that other male is going to be ready in a year or two. What harm does it do me to wait for a year? What harm does it do me to wait for another 2 years? Sure, something might happen to the female, but even if something happens to the female or male, I would still feel much better about myself having said, well, I waited to do that pairing rather than just going, she's ready, I can do that cross and I can get money back in. It's like, I think the whole thing is you just have to look at yourself and why you are keeping, like, ask yourself, why am I doing this pairing? Why am I keeping these animals? I think that's one thing that, and sort of like with social media, you can get lost in the sort of the storm of social media and becoming, nowadays, you have to seem to be a personality. You have to seem to be in one clique or another in the reptile keeping community. You can't really just like, it seems that if you just go out and do your own thing, like you're not sort of part of the community, you're not part of this group, you're not part of that group. There seems to be a sort of like taboo about being out on your own, doing your own thing, and I think that's something that needs to sort of change in the hobby.
They don't want you to be too much like everyone else, but also not too much on your own. Like, it's like they want,
you want friends in the hobby.
They want you to be both, but the hobby wants you to be both. It wants you to be in the group, but not too much in the group that you do the same thing as everyone else. But like, if you're too far away, they're like, like, it's frustrating because the hobby wants you to be both.
Because we don't fit into, like, we don't know any ball python people or like stuff like that. And maybe that's like not a great thing. Maybe that's not a good reflection. Like, we should be friends with all snake people, which, I mean, we try our best and we've had ball python people on, but like we end up falling into a category anyway.
But you gravitate to like brings like you gravitate to people who share the same either keeping values or like keeping ethics as you, or the same ideas as you. It's not a case of like, you like people should say, oh, you should be friends to everybody, and like, oh yeah, accept everything that everybody says. I mean, like, I've got into contention with people on groups because they've encouraged someone collecting a wild animal when the person doesn't know the common name or the species name or the basic care requirements. And people, like, if you bring an ethical debate to that and say like, well, should you be collecting this if you don't know the basics about it? And people then saying, oh no, like, you've got to help them to help understand, and like, oh, you've got to help them, and like, this isn't a place for ethical debates. You've got to help these people no matter what, just to satisfy a group of people that are following you. I'm like, no, you've got to still maintain an ethical high ground. Like, you've got to have a moral standard and an ethical standard where you go, what is better? Helping someone learn how to care for an animal they've just picked up out of the wild, or helping that person research that animal's needs before they go out and collect one or buy one. And I think the latter is more important. It's like, screw it if people like you or if they don't like you. As long as you can say hand on heart, I'm doing what's best for the animals, then I don't think anybody has the opportunity to criticize you.
Right. Okay. For real last question. I'm sorry. No, he said it literally like,
you probably have to pee, man.
times.
Like, we both peed during this whole thing and you didn't. So
I didn't pee.
That's what Laurence did. You went out to do something.
To blow my nose 17 times. I'm dying. Okay. For real last question. It's been like a thing you've been doing lately. Totally not snake or reptile related, but what is the weirdest food you've ever eaten?
The weirdest food? Does rock count? Being a geologist, I've like, you have to chew pieces of, one of the ways of finding out the grade of the fineness of rock is actually like biting a piece of slate or piece of mudstone
What? I
and
thought
seeing
you
how
like rub
fine
them
the
up
grain.
against each other. I thought that's what you did.
No, apparently, well, we caught enough people out with it. Is you just bite a piece of rock and you can go, right, well, that's coarse grain or that's fine grain. So probably rocks is probably the one thing that the one weirdest thing I've eaten.
Wait, so do all
Yeah.
geologists have like worn out teeth or
Teeth from it
something?
breaking on a rock.
You do it once when you're told about it, and then you don't do it again. You realize you sort of you do it once and then you go, yeah, this isn't something I'm gonna continue doing. Like there's easier ways to. I'm just gonna like write down what I think it'll be. But it is a way apparently of telling what grain size any a sandstone or a sedimentary rock is made of. Is you just bite it, see how crunchy it feels in between your teeth.
Science.
Wow, that was not what I was expecting at all. Someone in the chat
This is what people should expect with me. Like you think of an answer that you're gonna get, expect something completely different.
Well, that's not a bad thing.
Okay. If anyone wants to get in contact with you, Laurence, how can they reach you?
Facebook at LARK Pythons, or like the profile I'm using now for purely reptile related things is just Laurence and then Somalia Kenchington. And they can like send a Facebook request and just send me a message. I'm pretty good at getting back to people, and like I'm more than happy to talk about like from experience from where I've come from and what's worked for me. But I will always say like what's worked for me may not work for anybody else. It's all a thing of you have to know your own animals, and you know your own animals better than anybody. We can give as much as anybody can give as much advice as you want, no matter how many years experience you have. But unless they're working with your animals, they can't say you have to be able to judge by your animals what's going on. So, but yeah, I'm happy to talk to anybody, like if they want to ask questions about scrubs, water pythons, and a big question that has been coming up is, am I exporting to the US? The plans are there in the future, and I know the people who I will be going through if I do. So, like, if people are in the market for scrub pythons or water pythons, hopefully within the next 1 to 2 years, I'll be able to be sort of producing enough that making a shipment to the US would be possible. So that's one thing I'd say, like, it may not be now, but soon it might be a reality for people in the States who sort of like want to get some of the animals that I work with.
That's awesome, because that might be an integral part of keeping those animals in the hobby and getting a good group of captive-born animals in the U.S., which isn't currently available. You know, with such a small amount of animals, I mean, it's nice to be able to distribute them, you know, across countries, across continents, all over the place. Let's try to. I'm about to get on another subject.
I know.
Okay, go.
Cut your
Say our
mouth.
stuff. Sorry.
That's how weird.
Cut my mouth.
That's not what I'm. That's what. Stop talking. That's really what I was trying to say.
Thanks.
But yeah, I mean, as soon as I know whether mahogany is laid or whatever, and I'm back after sort of the new year, hopefully, sort of like after this breeding season, hopefully I'll have some news regarding Timors and other scrubs, and hopefully the Boiga. So, like, I have no problem coming back on, and then you can pick my brains as much as you want about this breeding season.
Yeah, because we failed at the not talking about scrubs.
Anybody who's spoken to me knows that like once scrubs are mentioned, it's just a one-track conversation of just like I'll pour out everything that I found or like I've learned. I'll just like be this is what we're talking about for the next 2 hours. So
we tried.
Well, good. It's almost been 3 hours of scrubs
I know,
now.
and it's like 2 a.m. for you. I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
What's next?
You're supposed to say our website.
If anyone wants to reach us, obviously on YouTube, if you're listening to this right now, catch us on Instagram, Port City Pythons, website, portcitypythons.com, Facebook, Port City Pythons, email, theportcitypythons@gmail.com.
And that's pretty much it,
and
guys.
That's it.
Get all the plugs in.
Yes.
There you go.
Thank you, Laurence, again for coming on, and I hope
no worries.
And get warm.
Right, I'll let you
Bye,
guys go.
guys.
So thanks for having me on.
Of course.
Bye.